Section 1, The Couch Gag Secrets Eggs 1 through 11. There is something deeply comforting about the opening of The Simpsons. You probably know it before the first note even plays that saxophone melody, the way it curls upward like smoke from a backyard barbecue, and then the clouds part and yellow letters tumble across the sky. You have seen this opening hundreds of times, maybe thousands, and yet there is always something new hiding inside it. That is what we are here for tonight. We are going to move slowly through the world of Springfield together, lifting up corners, peering behind doors, and finding all the things that were placed there quietly, lovingly, by the writers and animators who spent their careers filling this show with secrets meant for people paying close attention. So settle in, let your shoulders drop, and let's begin at the very beginning, the couch gag. Most people treat the couch gag as a kind of preamble, a warm-up. Something to half-watch while you reach for your snack or adjust your blanket. But the people who made The Simpsons have always treated it as something far more interesting than that. It is, in a way, a short film unto itself, a compressed experiment in animation, in parody, in visual humor, and for those willing to slow things down and look carefully, the couch gags are absolutely riddled with Easter eggs and hidden references that reward the patient viewer. Let's start right at the beginning. Easter egg number 1 is something that took dedicated fans years to fully catalog, and it has to do with the chalkboard sequence at the very opening of each episode. Before Bart slides off his skateboard and before the family converges on the couch, there is a brief glimpse of him at school, writing lines on a blackboard. The sentence changes every episode. But here is what most people miss. In the very earliest seasons, the chalkboard gag was sometimes barely legible. The animators in South Korea, who handled much of the show's cell animation at the time, would occasionally render the handwriting in a slightly different style more looping, less precise, and the joke would be technically there but slightly blurred at the edges. Fans who frame-grabbed those early episodes discovered that some chalkboard gags from seasons 1 and 2 contain what appear to be minor errors in the lettering, where a word runs slightly off the line or the spacing between letters compresses unexpectedly. These are not intentional gags. They are artifacts of the overseas animation pipeline, but they have become, over time, beloved curiosities, proof that the show, even in its most polished form, was assembled by human hands, far apart from each other, working across time zones. Easter egg number 2 lives inside the couch gag from the episode Homer Badman, which first aired during season 6. In this particular couch gag, the family rushes in to find that the couch is occupied by a long line of earlier couch gag iterations, all the variations that had come before, essentially stacked up and waiting. It plays as a joke about the show's own history, but look closely at the far left edge of that couch pile, and you will see a brief flash of a couch design that was never actually used in a couch gag that aired. It appears for roughly 2 frames. Fan communities spent years debating whether this was an intentional Easter egg planted by a mischievous animator, or simply a model that had been created during production and slipped in as a background element before anyone caught it. The show's producers have never officially commented. It remains one of those delightful mysteries that the internet has chewed on for decades. Easter egg number 3 is from one of the most famous couch gags in the show's history, the Banksy-directed couch gag that opened the season 22 episode, Money Bart. This was a landmark moment. For the show, a rare instance of an outside artist taking full creative control of the opening sequence, and Banksy used the opportunity to deliver a stark and somewhat uncomfortable commentary on the overseas animation industry. The sequence shows a grim factory in Asia, where underpaid workers produce Simpsons merchandise and animation cells under miserable conditions. It was provocative and widely discussed, but tucked into that sequence, in the corner of one frame as the camera pans across the factory floor, is what appears to be a crate stenciled with the words, "Return to Sender." It is a small detail, easy to miss, and it speaks to Banksy's larger theme about the circular, exploitative nature of global media production, but it is also a nod to a specific piece of Banksy's street art from years earlier, a mailbox stencil he had done in East London. It is a signature hidden inside a signature. Easter egg number 4 is quieter. It lives in the couch gag from Bart Gets Famous, a season 5 episode, where the family discovers that the couch has been replaced by a different family, a group of characters who look like a rough approximation of a generic sitcom household. They smile and wave. The Simpsons look confused, The whole thing lasts about 4 seconds. But if you freeze frame at the moment the two families make eye contact, you can see that one of the background family members standing slightly behind the main group, partially obscured, is drawn with a face that bears a striking resemblance to one of the show's recurring background characters, a nameless man in a green jacket who appears in crowd scenes throughout Springfield with uncanny frequency. He is sometimes called the Green Jacket Guy by fans, and his presence in this couch gag, masquerading as part of a different fictional family, is thought to be a deliberate in-joke from one of the animators. Easter egg number 5 takes us to the famous Star Wars couch gag from Season 26, which reimagined the entire opening sequence as an elaborate parody of the classic John Williams-scored space opera. The attention to detail in this couch gag is astonishing. Every frame is packed with visual references to the film. But there is one detail that sits a little off to the side of the obvious parodies. In the background of the scene where Homer as Luke approaches what is clearly meant to be the Mos Eisley Cantina, there is a wall covered in alien graffiti. Most of it is nonsense squiggles designed to evoke the visual language of a science fiction setting. But one small piece of that graffiti, on the far right side of the wall, appears to be written in a real constructed language, specifically a character set that resembles Aurebesh, the writing system from the Star Wars universe. And when fans familiar with Aurebesh actually decoded it, the phrase translated roughly to, "Don't have a cow." It is Bart's catchphrase, rendered in a fictional alien alphabet, buried in the background of a parody sequence that lasts less than 90 seconds. Whoever put that there wanted to be found eventually. Easter egg number 6 is one of my absolute favorites, and it involves the opening title card itself. In the standard opening sequence, the word Simpsons appears in large, colorful letters across a cloudy sky. The font is distinctive, bold, playful, with a slight wobble to it. But in a small number of episodes across the show's run, most concentrated in the middle seasons, careful viewers have noticed that the letter S at the end of Simpsons appears to be very slightly larger than the letter S at the beginning. Not dramatically so, just a pixel or two depending on the transfer and screen resolution you are watching on. The leading theory among fans is that this is not intentional, that it is a subtle artifact of how the title sequence was composited, with the end card text assembled separately from the main title graphic. But there is a small, persistent contingent of fans who believe it was done deliberately, as a nod to the idea that the family at the end of each episode has grown metaphorically, emotionally, even if only by the tiniest fraction. Easter egg number 7 is hidden in the couch gag from Homer's Enemy, the Season 8 episode featuring the beloved and heartbreaking Frank Grimes. In this couch gag, the family rushes in and the couch is not there at all. The wall behind it is blank, and the space where the couch should be is filled only with a faint, rectangular outline in the paint, the ghost of a couch that has been removed. It is a melancholy little gag, and it fits the tone of the episode, which is one of the darkest the show ever produced. But there is a secondary element. On the blank wall where the couch should be, barely visible in the paint discoloration, is what appears to be a crudely drawn face, just 2 eyes and a line for a mouth. Fan speculation has settled on the idea that this is meant to be Frank Grimes himself, rendered in the style of a child's drawing, haunting the space before the episode has even properly begun. Easter egg number 8 requires a bit of history to properly appreciate. In the very first couch gag, from the pilot episode Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the family rushes in and sits down on the couch. Normally, Maggie gets squeezed out by the press of bodies and pops up in Marge's arms. Simple, clean, effective. But if you watch the timing of that gag and compare it to the same basic beat as it appears in rerun openings later in the series, you will notice that the timing of Maggie's pop has been very subtly adjusted. In later airings, she pops up just a fraction of a second earlier. The animators tightened the rhythm slightly, almost imperceptibly, because when the sequence was edited into episodes with a slightly different overall runtime, the original timing caused the gag to land just slightly off the music. It is a behind-the-scenes correction that most viewers never consciously register, but which affects how the joke lands on a deep, intuitive level. Easter egg number 9 takes us to the couch gag from The Boy Who Knew Too Much, Season 5, where the family runs in and discovers their couch has become a boat floating on an endless ocean. They all sit down, apparently unbothered, and Homer produces a fishing rod. It is a surreal, dreamlike gag, and it has always been a fan favorite. But hidden in the background of that sequence, visible for only a moment as the camera settles, is a very small island on the horizon. On that island, rendered in just a few pixels, is what appears to be a tiny version of the Springfield nuclear power plant cooling tower. It is absurdly far away and completely incongruous with the ocean setting, but it is there. An animator with a sense of humor and a very fine brush put it there, almost certainly knowing it would take years for anyone to notice. Easter egg number 10 is not visual, it is sonic. In the original broadcast version of several Season 3 episodes, the distinctive musical sting that plays over the title card, that short, punchy orchestral hit, contains a note that was slightly different from the version used in later syndication. Specifically, the horn section in the original broadcast version sits about a quarter step sharper than in the syndicated version. This is not a deliberate Easter egg in the traditional sense. It is a result of the show's audio being remastered for later distribution, and the remastering process introduced a very slight pitch variation. But it has become a point of obsession for certain audiophile fans who grew up watching the show in its original broadcast window and felt, without being able to articulate why, that the theme song sounded slightly different in reruns. They were right. It does. Easter egg number 11 brings us back to the visual, and it is perhaps the most quietly moving one in this opening section. In the couch gag from And Maggie Makes 3, the Season 6 episode that finally explains why there are no photos of Maggie in the family photo wall, the couch gag itself is simple. The family sits down normally. No twist, no joke. Just the family, together, on the couch. At the time, audiences wondered if the couch gag had simply been forgotten or cut for time. But by the end of the episode, when Homer reveals that all of Maggie's baby photos have been placed at his work desk, under a demotivational plaque that he has modified to read, "Do it for her," the simple couch gag recontextualizes itself entirely. The family just sitting down together, unremarkably, is itself the Easter egg, a statement that some things do not need a twist. Some things are enough exactly as they are. Before we move on to Section 2, I want to pause here for a moment. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, drop a comment and tell me your city, your country, what time it is where you are. I love seeing where these videos reach, and if this is the kind of thing that helps you drift off or unwind, consider subscribing. It means more than you know. Now, let's keep going. Section 2. Hidden Messages in Background. Art Eggs 12 through 22. One of the quiet pleasures of rewatching The Simpsons is noticing the background. Not the foreground, not the characters delivering dialogue, not the plot, the background, the walls of the buildings, the signs outside the restaurants, the posters in the school hallways, the framed paintings in the living rooms of people the camera spends only 3 seconds on. The background of The Simpsons is essentially its own separate show, running silently behind the main one, visible only to those who are paying the right kind of attention. This is not an accident. The background artists and prop designers who worked on The Simpsons have always been among the most creative people in the room, and they have always known that their work would be seen by 2 distinct audiences: the casual viewer, who would absorb the backgrounds as atmosphere without reading them, and the obsessive viewer, the person who hits pause, who squints, who goes back 3 times to make sure they saw what they think they saw. The backgrounds were made for both of those people simultaneously. And the jokes, references, and secrets buried in those backgrounds have been accumulating for over 35 years. Easter egg number 12 is one of the most celebrated background gags in the show's history, and it has been discussed so often that it has almost become legend, but it is worth revisiting with fresh eyes, because the full depth of it tends to get flattened in the retelling. In the Season 1 episode Homer's Odyssey, there is a scene set inside the Springfield nuclear power plant, and on a bulletin board in the background, visible for perhaps 2 seconds, someone has posted a safety notice. The safety notice, if you can read it, contains a paragraph of text that is not actually safety advice. It is a very slightly modified excerpt from a legal boilerplate document used in the entertainment industry. The modification is subtle. One specific clause about liability has been altered so that it now applies not to personal injury, but to spiritual damage sustained during the viewing of animated content. It is the kind of thing a lawyer would read and feel deeply uncomfortable about, and it is sitting on a bulletin board in a nuclear power plant in a cartoon. Easter egg number 13 is found in the background of the Springfield Elementary School cafeteria, specifically in the episode Lunch Lady Doris, and it involves the motivational posters on the walls. Most of them are parodies of the kind of inspirational posters you would see in any American school cafeteria sunsets with words like perseverance underneath them. But one of the posters, partially obscured by a lunch cart, features a sunset with a word that, when you can make out the full text, reads persistence or possibly just good luck. It is a tiny act of philosophical rebellion from an animator who clearly had strong feelings about the self-help poster industry. Easter egg number 14 is located in the Quick E-Mart, which is one of the show's most frequently visited locations and therefore one of the most thoroughly cataloged by fans. Apu's store is packed with background detail products with absurd names, signs with nonsensical prices, and small visual jokes that change from episode to episode. But there is one constant that has been present in the background of the Quickie Mart in a substantial number of episodes. A small handwritten sign near the cash register that reads, "No shirt, no shoes, no problem." It is the inverse of the standard "no shirt, no shoes, no service" sign, and its presence there has been a recurring low-key gag for years. What most people miss, however, is that in at least 3 separate episodes, the sign has been modified. In one episode, it reads "no shirt, no shoes, no pants, still probably fine." In another, it reads "no shirt, no shoes, no soul, welcome." These variations appear and disappear without comment, and the only way to catch them is to be watching the background of the Quick E-Mart with the same attentiveness you might bring to watching the main plot. Easter egg number 15 takes us to Moe's Tavern, another location the show returns to again and again, and another location packed with background Easter eggs accumulated over decades. Moe's Tavern has a mirror behind the bar that has been visible in hundreds of episodes, and reflected in that mirror, depending on the angle and the episode, are all sorts of things that should not technically be visible from the camera's perspective. In a handful of episodes across the middle seasons, fans using pause and frame analysis have identified what appears to be a small framed photograph hanging on the wall in the reflection, a wall that, if we take the bar's geometry seriously, would be somewhere off-camera to the left. The photograph, grainy and small in the reflection, appears to show a group of men in what looks like 1970s clothing, standing outside a building. Nobody has ever officially identified who these people are. The working fan theory is that it is a photograph of the original writing staff from one of the show's earliest seasons, placed as a background Easter egg by a production designer who had access to old photographs from the show's archive. Easter egg number 16 is from the episode Homer Goes to College, and it involves the background art of the university Homer attends. In one particular hallway scene, the camera moves past a series of framed portraits of former university presidents. Most of the portraits are generic painted men in suits, vaguely dignified, with made-up names on the plaques below. But the third portrait from the left, partially cropped by the edge of the frame, shows a figure whose facial features are a very close approximation of Matt Groening himself. The name on the plaque is not Groening, but rather a slightly scrambled version of it, with a few letters transposed. It is the kind of Easter egg that requires you to both recognize Groening's face and catch the name anagram simultaneously, which is a fairly high bar, but for those who clear it, it is enormously satisfying. Easter egg number 17 is quieter and more emotionally resonant. In the episode Lisa's Wedding, which is set partially in the future and involves a glimpse of what Lisa's adult life might look like, there are several scenes set in a London apartment. The background art of that apartment is remarkably detailed for a sequence that only lasts a few minutes. And in the background of Lisa's bookshelf, fans have identified a small number of book spines with legible titles. Most of them are jokes, made-up academic titles in the style of books a serious young woman might own. But one title, on the far left of the second shelf, appears to read something like Springfield, a History. It is a fictional book about the town Lisa grew up in, sitting on her shelf in London, decades after she left. It is a tiny detail, never commented on, that speaks volumes about who Lisa Simpson is and what Springfield means to her. Easter egg number 18 is hidden in a window. In the episode Bart's Dog Gets an F, the family enrolls Santa's little helper in an obedience school, and there is a brief scene where Homer watches through a large window as the dog training session proceeds. In the reflection on the window glass reflections being a longtime favorite hiding place for animators, you can see a very faint image of what appears to be a different dog from an earlier episode. It is just a shape, really, a rough dog-shaped smear of color in the reflection, but its proportions match those of a background dog character who appeared in a Season 1 episode and was never seen again. The animators who worked on the episode appear to have snuck in a visual nod to this forgotten character, using the physics of reflected light as their excuse. Easter egg number 19 takes us outside, Springfield proper, into the show's representation of the wider world. In any episode that features a map of the United States, whether as a graphic element, a background detail, or a prop someone is holding, Springfield is invariably absent. The town simply does not appear on any map shown in the show. This is, of course, the deliberate policy of the show's creators, who have always been coy about Springfield's location. But what fans have noticed is that while Springfield itself is absent, a small, unnamed dot appears on several of these maps in approximately the location where fans have triangulated Springfield to be, based on internal evidence from multiple episodes. It is not labeled. It is just a dot. The show acknowledges Springfield's existence on a map while simultaneously refusing to confirm it. Easter egg number 20 is from the Season 4 episode New Kid on the Block, which introduces the Winfield house next door to The Simpsons. In the background of several scenes set in The Simpsons' kitchen during this episode, the wall calendar that has appeared in the background of that kitchen in dozens of previous episodes has been updated with a new image. In prior episodes, the calendar featured a generic pastoral landscape, a mountain, some trees. In this episode, the calendar image is a painting of a house that looks remarkably like the Winfield house, a house that has not yet been introduced to the audience at the point in the episode where the calendar appears. It is a background detail that technically spoils the episode's main set piece, but it does so in a way that is so subtle, so buried in the background, that you would only catch it on a rewatch, at which point the joke becomes a reward for your attention. Easter egg number 21 is one of the most technically impressive background Easter eggs in the show's history, and it involves the Springfield town square as seen from above. In several episodes that feature aerial shots of the town, usually as a transition shot, a brief establishing moment, the arrangement of buildings, streets, and open spaces in the town square, when viewed carefully, forms a pattern. Not a word or a name exactly, but a shape. The shape is something like a figure 8 or an infinity symbol, and its intentionality has been hotly debated. The argument against intentionality is that town squares in American cities often have roughly symmetrical layouts, and a rough figure 8 shape could emerge from standard urban planning aesthetics. The argument for intentionality is that in at least 2 of the aerial shots, the shape is slightly clearer than in others, as if the animators adjusted the layout for those specific shots to make the pattern more legible. Whether it means anything, whether it is a reference to the show's endless, cyclical nature, nobody has ever officially confirmed. Easter egg number 22 closes out this section and brings us back to the Simpsons' living room, which is the most visited location in television history and the place where you have probably spent a significant portion of your own viewing life. The painting above the Simpsons' couch, that slightly blurry pastoral scene, boats on a river, muted greens and blues changes. Not dramatically. Not in a way you would notice watching normally, but across dozens of episodes, the painting shifts. Sometimes the boats are on the left side. Sometimes they are on the right. Sometimes there are 2 boats. Sometimes there is 1. Sometimes the sky is lighter. Sometimes the hills in the background are a slightly different shape. The changes are never consistent, never building toward anything, never commented on. It is as if the painting, like the family, has a life of its own, quietly rearranging itself when nobody is looking, always the same but never quite identical. Section 3. Springfield's Secret Geography. Eggs 23 through 33. Springfield is, by design, everywhere and nowhere. Its creators made that decision deliberately and early, choosing to root the show in a town named Springfield, because Springfield is the most common town name in the United States. There are Springfields in 34 states. The ambiguity was the point. Springfield was supposed to feel like your Springfield, whoever you were and wherever you came from. But this studied vagueness has had a fascinating side effect. The internal geography of Springfield, the spatial relationship between its buildings and neighborhoods and landmarks, has had to be invented and reinvented and occasionally contradicted across 35-plus years of episodes. And in the gaps between the contradictions, the inconsistencies, the moments where the map fails to match itself, there are Easter eggs hiding in plain sight. Easter egg number 23 is perhaps the most famous example of Springfield's geographic impossibility, and it has been documented extensively by fans who have attempted to build a coherent map of the town. In the Season 1 episode, Moaning Lisa, there is an establishing shot of Springfield that shows the power plant in relation to the Simpson house. Based on the angle and the visible landmarks, the power plant appears to be northwest of the house. But in the Season 2 episode Bart Gets Hit by a Car, a different establishing shot places the power plant clearly to the southeast. Both shots are drawn with internal consistency, the details are right, the proportions work, the landmarks check out. They simply cannot both be true simultaneously. Fan cartographers have proposed dozens of solutions to this problem, most of them involving some form of topological impossibility, a Springfield that folds back on itself, a town that exists in more than one configuration depending on the episode's needs. What these fans have actually discovered, without quite framing it this way, is that Springfield is not a place, it is a feeling. Easter egg number 24 is about a road. There is a street in Springfield called Evergreen Terrace, which is where the Simpsons live, and its address is 742. This is well known, but less well known is that Evergreen Terrace, as a street, appears in the background of episodes set in parts of Springfield that should be geographically distant from it. The street sign appears in a crowd scene in downtown Springfield in one episode. It appears outside what is clearly meant to be the school in another. It appears near the waterfront in a third. The Evergreen Terrace sign has essentially migrated across the entire town over the years, turning up wherever an animator needed a quick street name and reached for the most familiar one. The result, if you map all its appearances, is a Springfield where Evergreen Terrace winds through every neighborhood, a single street that somehow connects everything. Easter egg number 25 concerns the Springfield Mall, which has appeared in a large number of episodes and been used as a setting for everything from family outings to criminal schemes to teenage romantic encounters. The mall's layout changes significantly between appearances. The food court is sometimes on the ground floor and sometimes on an upper level. The anchor stores rotate, the central atrium changes shape, but there is one constant. In every episode that shows the exterior of the mall, there is a sign above the main entrance that reads Springfield Mall with a tagline underneath. The tagline changes every single time. In one episode it reads, "A great place to be." In another it reads, "You'll probably find what you need." In another it reads, "Under new management since 1987, an episode that aired in 1994. The rotating taglines are never acknowledged, never commented on, and function as a kind of ambient humor that the show maintains quietly across its entire run. Easter egg number 26 takes us to the Springfield Elementary School, and specifically to its exterior. The school has a distinctive look, a flat-roofed mid-century institutional building, brick, utilitarian, the kind of building that communicates public education budget constraints through its very architecture. But eagle-eyed viewers have noticed that the number of windows on the school's facade is not consistent. In some episodes, the front of the school has 4 windows flanking the entrance. In others, it has 6. In a small number of episodes, it appears to have only 2, both of them very large. This is the kind of continuity error that happens in any long-running animated show. Background models get revised, shortcuts get taken. Nobody catches every inconsistency in a production that generates 22 episodes a year for decades. But the fan community has elevated this to Easter egg status by creating detailed episode guides that track the window count, and the prevailing theory, offered half-seriously, is that Springfield Elementary has been undergoing continuous renovations since the school opened, and the front facade has never quite been finished. Easter egg number 27 is about elevation, and it is one of the subtler geographic Easter eggs in the show. Springfield is sometimes depicted as a flat, Midwestern-style town on a broad plain. It is sometimes depicted as a hilly town with significant elevation changes between neighborhoods. It is occasionally depicted with a mountain or significant elevated terrain somewhere in the background. The mountain, when it appears, has been given different names in different episodes. The mountain, Mount Springfield, And once, in the background of a sign, something that appears to read Mount Useful. The inconsistency of the elevation is a genuine geographic impossibility, but it has given rise to one of the show's longest-running fan theories, that Springfield sits in a geologically unusual area, possibly a valley that is also elevated, possibly near a mountain range that is only visible from certain parts of town. Fans have constructed elaborate geological surveys of Springfield using only the visual evidence from the episodes. The results are different every time. Easter egg number 28 is about the river. Springfield has a river, the Springfield River, or sometimes just the river, and it has appeared in episodes as a site of pollution, recreation, industrial disaster, and romantic encounters. The river's path through Springfield is, like most things about the town's geography, inconsistent. But there is a specific inconsistency that fans have latched onto as potentially intentional. In a handful of Season 4 through Season 6 episodes, the river appears to flow in two different directions depending on which bank you are looking at it from. In establishing shots from the north bank, the current appears to move east to west. In establishing shots from the south bank, it appears to move west to east. The fan theory, the generous, charitable fan theory, is that the river makes a horseshoe bend somewhere off-screen, and both shots are accurate depictions of different stretches of the same river. The less charitable theory is that the background artists simply chose whichever direction looked better compositionally and did not compare notes. Both explanations feel somehow appropriate for Springfield. Easter egg number 29 concerns the nuclear power plant, which is probably the second most iconic building in Springfield after the family's house. The plant has 4 cooling towers, except when it has 2, except when it has 6. The number of cooling towers visible on the Springfield nuclear power plant has never been consistent across the show's run, and the variation is significant enough that fans have been tracking it since the early days of internet Simpsons communities. There is, hidden in this inconsistency, an actual Easter egg in the Season 8 episode Homer's Enemy, where Frank Grimes is introduced and the show makes explicit use of the plant as a setting. Every exterior shot of the plant shows exactly 4 cooling towers. This episode is widely regarded as one of the most carefully constructed in the show's history, and the consistency of the cooling tower count in that specific episode, a consistency that does not exist in most other episodes, is thought to be intentional, a visual signal that this episode takes place in a more grounded, realistic version of Springfield than usual. Easter egg number 30 is about what is below Springfield. In the Season 5 episode Homer and Apu, there is a brief scene where a sinkhole opens in a Springfield street, and as characters peer into it, the camera cuts to a brief shot looking up from the bottom of the hole. In the background of that underground shot, clearly visible for a fraction of a second, there appears to be a structure, a wall maybe, something that looks built rather than geological. It has been freeze-framed and analyzed and debated. The general consensus is that it is meant to suggest that Springfield was built on top of an older, buried town, a Springfield that existed before the current one, swallowed by the earth and forgotten. Whether this is a genuine piece of lore or an animator's throwaway detail, it is a haunting little image. Easter egg number 31 takes us to the outskirts of Springfield, to the areas of town that the show visits infrequently and therefore treats with a kind of creative looseness that sometimes produces delightful details. There is a neighborhood at the edge of Springfield visible in a handful of episodes as a brief establishing shot that appears to be a distinctly different architectural style from the rest of town. The houses are slightly larger, slightly older looking, with details that suggest a late Victorian or early Edwardian construction style rather than the mid-century suburban aesthetic of the Simpsons neighborhood. This neighborhood has never been given a name or addressed in dialogue. It simply exists at the edge of the frame in a few episodes, quietly suggesting that Springfield has a history that predates the post-war suburban boom, that there was a Springfield before the Springfield we know. Easter egg number 32 is about the highway. Springfield has a highway, or possibly several highways, and at various points in the show, a highway sign has been visible in the background of road scenes. These signs sometimes give a distance to the next town. The names of these neighboring towns are almost always nonsensical, impossible, or quietly hilarious. One sign reads, "Next town, 7 miles." Another reads, "Capital City, far." One sign in an episode from the middle seasons gives a distance to a town called Not Springfield, 3 miles. These sign gags are easy to miss because they appear during scenes where the main characters are driving and the dialogue is the focus. But they are consistently there, a running joke about the indeterminate nature of Springfield's place in the world. Easter egg number 33 brings this section to a close, and it is one of the most poignant geographic Easter eggs in the show. In the episode Bart on the Road, which involves the kids taking a road trip, there is a map shown on screen, a real, legible map drawn as a prop. The map shows a region of the United States with various towns and cities marked. Springfield is, as always, absent. But one of the other town names on the map, tucked in the corner, almost off the edge of the paper, is Shelbyville, Springfield's great rival, its shadow self. The town that is always just across some invisible line. Shelbyville on the map is not given coordinates, not given a relationship to any real geography. It is simply there, at the edge of the known world, which is exactly where Shelbyville has always existed, adjacent to Springfield, defined by opposition to it, present but unreachable. Section 4. Character name origins and hidden meanings. Eggs 34 through 44. Names in The Simpsons are never accidental. From the very beginning, Matt Groening and the writers around him used character names as a kind of secondary text running beneath the show's surface jokes, references, biographical details, and philosophical statements compressed into the names of people who might appear in only a single episode, or who might recur across the entire 35-year run. Some of these name origins are well known, talked about in interviews, and documented extensively online. Others are more obscure, buried in the show's production history, or hidden in plain sight in a way that makes them easy to overlook. What follows is a slow, careful walk through some of the most interesting of them. Easter egg number 34 concerns the family itself, and specifically a name origin that Groening has discussed openly, but that still surprises many fans when they hear it. Homer, Marge, and Maggie are all named after Matt Groening's own family members, his father Homer, his mother Margaret, and his sister Maggie. This is the part that most people know. What fewer people know is that this naming decision was made partly out of sentimentality and partly out of a practical desire to give the show a kind of autobiographical root, a personal stake in the ground that Groening could return to whenever the show needed emotional grounding. The character of Homer Simpson was not modeled on Groening's father in terms of personality. Homer Groening was apparently a much more intellectual and cheerful figure, but the name served as a quiet dedication, a way of keeping his family present in the work. When you watch Homer Simpson do something catastrophic and heartfelt, there is a real man named Homer who was part of the reason the character was named that way. Easter egg number 35 is about Bart. The name Bart is widely understood to be an anagram of brat, and this is true, and it was intentional. But the name Bart has a secondary meaning that is less commonly discussed. In Hebrew, the word bar means son of, and names beginning with bar are traditionally patronymics in certain naming conventions. Bar Jonah, meaning son of Jonah, for instance. The name Bart, while almost certainly not a direct invocation of this tradition on Groening's part, has produced a fan interpretation that reads Bart Simpson, as containing within it the idea of son of Simpson, a recursive naming joke, a name that contains within it its own parentage. Whether this is intentional or a happy accident of etymology, it is the kind of double meaning that the show's writers, who are famously well-educated and verbally dexterous, would have appreciated. Easter egg number 36 is about Lisa, and it is one of the most openly acknowledged name origins in the show's history. Groening's sister Lisa is the direct source of the character's name, just as Maggie is named for another sister. But the choice to name the family's intellectual, sensitive, musically gifted member after a real person in his family carries an interesting weight. The real Lisa Groening has spoken publicly about the character, and the relationship between the real person and the animated character is touching and a little complicated. The animated Lisa is, in many ways, an idealized version of certain qualities Groening admired, rendered in yellow and given a saxophone, and placed in a situation where her gifts are perpetually undervalued. Naming her after his sister was a way of honoring those qualities, and of placing something real and personal at the center of what could easily have been just a functional character filling the role of the smart kid. Easter egg number 37 is about a character who most casual viewers know by sight, but might not know by name. Sideshow Bob. His full name is Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. The surname Terwilliger is a real surname. It is of Dutch-American origin and appears in census records throughout the northeastern United States. Using a real surname for a recurring villain is a standard television naming convention, but the specific choice of Terwilliger is thought by some fans to be a reference to a real Terwilliger specifically, a minor historical figure from American local history who appeared in a document the writers had access to. The name Underdunk is clearly comic, and its presence as a middle name for an opera-loving, Shakespeare-quoting, Harvard-educated villain is a specific kind of joke about the gap between pretension and absurdity that defines Sideshow Bob as a character. Easter egg number 38 concerns the name Flanders. Ned Flanders, Homer's devout and infuriating neighbor, shares his surname with a real region Flanders, the northern region of Belgium, historically associated with medieval cloth trade and later with the First World War. The association with the war is particularly resonant given the poem In Flanders Fields, which is one of the most famous elegiac poems in the English language and is associated with poppies and remembrance. Whether the name Ned Flanders was chosen with this association in mind is unknown, but the character's function in the show, he is perpetually the suffering neighbor, the one who endures with patience and faith, the one who loses the most and keeps going, resonates uncomfortably with the imagery of patient suffering associated with Flanders as a historical concept. It is probably a coincidence, but it is the kind of coincidence that feels meaningful. Easter egg number 39 is about a name that appears in only one episode, but that has generated considerable fan discussion. In the Season 4 episode Selma's Choice, there is a brief scene at a travel agency where a character is addressed by name. The character is a minor figure, a one-scene appearance, functional rather than developed. Her name, spoken once, appears to be Patty Bouvier. Wait, that is not a one-episode name, that is a regular character. Let me redirect. In that same episode, there is a background travel agent whose nameplate reads something that fans have transliterated as D. Terwilliger, suggesting a possible relative of Sideshow Bob placed in a completely unrelated context with no explanation. The nameplate is visible for less than a second, and no Terwilliger connection is ever acknowledged in the episode. It is either a background Easter egg planted by a writer who wanted to play with the idea of the Terwilliger family being more widespread in Springfield than we know, or it is a coincidence of prop design. Either way, it is a fascinating little detail. Easter egg number 40 is about the recurring character of Krusty the Clown, whose real name Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yeruchim Krustovsky is one of the most elaborately Jewish names ever given to a character on American network television. The name is almost entirely composed of traditional Ashkenazi Jewish naming conventions. Herschel is a common Yiddish diminutive of Tzvi. Pinchas is a Hebrew name of priestly lineage. Yeruchim is a relatively rare Hebrew name meaning one who has been shown mercy. The full name is a kind of name poem, a compressed cultural biography. The fact that this name belongs to a clown, a deeply secular, financially motivated, morally compromised figure who is estranged from his rabbi father is the joke. The name is the most devout thing about Krusty. Everything else about him is a departure from it. Easter egg number 41 is about Apu Nahasapi Mapatilon. The surname, which is famously long and difficult to pronounce for non-South Asian speakers, is structured according to South Indian naming conventions, where a person's name often includes their father's name and their village of origin in addition to their personal name. Nahasapi Mapatilan is not a real South Indian surname. It is a comic invention, but it is constructed to sound plausibly like one, following the phonological patterns of Tamil or Telugu names. The writers consulted on the construction of the name when creating the character, and the result is a name that is at once a joke about the difficulty American ears have with South Asian names, and a genuine attempt to create something that sounds culturally authentic rather than randomly invented. Easter egg number 42 is about a name that most fans probably think they understand, but that has an additional layer. Mayor Diamond Joe Quimby is named after two Kennedys simultaneously. The Joe is John F. Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy. The Quimby is a town in Iowa that the writers chose because it sounds vaguely patrician and New Englandish, in a way appropriate for a Kennedy parody. But Diamond is the part that most discussions of the name origin gloss over. Diamond Joe, as a nickname, has a specific American historical usage. It was a nickname associated with flamboyant, glad-handing politicians from the Gilded Age, men who wore diamond stick pins and made a performance of their wealth. Using it for Quimby situates the character not just as a Kennedy parody, but as a comment on a whole tradition of American political theatricality that predates the Kennedys by a century. Easter egg number 43 concerns Dr. Julius Hibbert, the Simpsons family doctor, whose name carries a specific literary reference. Julius is simply a name, but Hibbert is thought to be a nod to Robert Hitchens, the author of The Garden of Allah and other novels from the early 20th century. Hitchens was known for his elegant, ironic prose style, and there is a doctor, Hibbert in at least one of his short stories a character who delivers bad news with inappropriate cheerfulness, which is of course exactly what Dr. Hibbert does in The Simpsons. The laugh. The delivery of catastrophic medical news accompanied by a warm, puzzled chuckle. It is borrowed behavior, transformed into character animation. Easter egg number 44 brings us to a name that is hiding in plain sight in almost every episode. Springfield itself. Springfield as a name was chosen by Groening specifically because it is generic, as mentioned earlier, but there is a secondary reference that Groening has acknowledged. Father Knows Best, the classic 1950s family sitcom that served as a template for and a target of The Simpsons' satirical ambitions, was set in a town called Springfield. The Simpsons' Springfield is partly an homage and partly a deconstruction of that earlier Springfield. It takes the same name and fills it with everything that Father Knows Best left out. Dysfunction, failure, economic anxiety, the gap between the idealized American family and the actual one. The name is a direct line between the show and its satirical target, hiding in the very first word of the show's premise. Section 5. Chalkboard gags and their hidden stories. Eggs 45 through 55. Every episode of The Simpsons begins, in one way or another, with Bart Simpson being punished. Before the couch, before the saxophone, before the family converges from their separate corners of Springfield, there is Bart, alone in a classroom, writing the same sentence over and over on a chalkboard. It is one of the oldest structural jokes in the show, a device inherited from the Warner Brothers cartoon tradition of the mid-20th century, where a character's transgression would be documented in writing before the narrative proper could begin. But the chalkboard gag in The Simpsons has always been more than a device. It has been, episode by episode, a kind of tiny editorial, a statement about the world outside the show, about the writer's current concerns and obsessions, about the nature of punishment itself, about the gap between what institutions demand and what children actually learn. And in the 35-year accumulation of those statements, there are Easter eggs with remarkable depth. Easter egg number 45 is about the first chalkboard gag ever, from the episode Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the pilot. Bart writes, "I will not waste chalk. It is a perfect first gag, self-referential, economical, slightly rebellious." The very act of writing a sentence about not wasting chalk is, of course, a waste of chalk. The show announces its own nature in the very first line it writes. It is a joke about the absurdity of rote punishment, and it is the foundational joke of the entire chalkboard tradition. But what most people do not know is that this line almost did not make it into the episode. An early script draft for the pilot included a different chalkboard line. "I will not draw funny pictures of my teacher," which was cut because the production team felt it was too close to a gag that had already been done in another animated show. The replacement line, "I will not waste chalk," was written quickly as a substitute and turned out to be the better joke in every way. The discard is arguably the only thing the show has ever thrown away that was genuinely less interesting than what replaced it. Easter egg number 46 concerns a streak of chalkboard gags that appeared during season 5 and 6, a period generally regarded as the show's creative peak. During this period, a number of chalkboard gags contained what appear to be references to current events or workplace frustrations that were directly traceable to things happening in the show's writer's room at the time. The cafeteria deep fryer is not a toy appeared during a period when the Fox network was reportedly pushing the show to reduce its more experimental content. I will not conduct my own fire drills appeared during a period when the show was dealing with network notes about episode length. Whether these connections are intentional or simply the result of a writer's room that processes its anxieties through the chalkboard gag, they create a strange documentary layer, a version of the show's production history encoded in Bart's punishment lines. Easter egg number 47 is one that requires a knowledge of contract law to fully appreciate. In the Season 7 episode Bart Sells His Soul, the chalkboard gag reads, "I will not sell my soul." This is a direct setup for the episode's plot, which involves Bart literally selling his soul to Milhouse for $5. But the use of the chalkboard to foreshadow the episode's plot is significant because it is one of the very few instances in the show's history where the chalkboard gag is not self-contained, but functions instead as a prologue, a statement of intent that only becomes fully meaningful once the episode is underway. The chalkboard gag is technically Bart writing something he has apparently been caught doing, which means that by the time we see it, the deal has already been made. Bart is confessing, in writing, to something he has already done. The chalkboard is not a punishment. It is a receipt. Easter egg number 48 is about what happens when the chalkboard gag goes wrong, when the sentence Bart is writing does not quite make grammatical sense, or where the meaning is ambiguous enough to read two ways. There are a handful of chalkboard gags across the show's run where the sentence is technically punishable, but also, if you read it carefully, describes something admirable. "I will not expose the ignorance of the faculty" is a famous example. Bart has apparently done something the school considers wrong, but reading the sentence, you realize that exposing the ignorance of the faculty is precisely what a curious, intellectually engaged student should do. The punishment line contains its own vindication. The show is using Bart's punishment to make a point about educational systems that punish the wrong things, and it is doing it in about 12 words. Easter egg number 49 is about the physical chalk. In a small number of episodes, particularly in the early seasons, when the production was still finding its visual language, the chalk writing on the board does not look quite like chalk. The lines are too precise, the coverage too even, the letters too uniform. Later seasons developed a more authentic chalk texture, slightly uneven lines, the occasional skip where the chalk ran thin, the way the letters apply more pressure at the beginning of a stroke. This evolution in the visual rendering of the chalkboard is not an Easter egg in the traditional sense, but fan communities have used it as a dating tool, arguing that episodes can be roughly placed in the production timeline by examining the texture of Bart's chalk lines. It is the most obsessive possible way to watch a cartoon. Easter egg number 50 is about a chalkboard gag that was written but never aired. The writers have mentioned in commentary and interviews that some chalkboard gags are written, approved for a script, and then cut during the editing process, sometimes because the episode runs long, sometimes because a network standards and practices reviewer flags the content. One gag that was reportedly written and rejected during the mid-seasons referenced a real political figure by name in a way that the network felt was legally actionable. The rejected gag was apparently extremely funny, and the writer's frustration at having it cut was significant enough that they referenced its absence obliquely in a later episode. The oblique reference is itself a background gag, a single line of background text visible in a crowd scene that appears to be a fragment of the rejected chalkboard sentence, preserved in amber in a location where it could not technically be flagged. Easter egg number 51 takes us to a specific moment in the Season 14 episode The Dad Who Knew Too Little, where the chalkboard gag reads, "I will not commit flattery." It is a quick, not particularly memorable gag, and most viewers move past it. But the word commit is doing interesting work here. We say commit a crime. We say commit an act. We do not usually say commit flattery. Flattery is something you practice, not commit. The choice of the word commit elevates flattery to the level of a transgression, suggesting that Bart has been so aggressively complimentary that it has risen to the level of misconduct, requiring official documentation. The writers are using the chalkboard's punitive grammar to take a word that normally implies wrongdoing and attach it to something innocuous, and the result is a sentence that tells you something quietly absurd about the relationship between punishment and the behavior it is meant to correct. Easter egg number 52 is seasonal. Across the show's run, the chalkboard gags and Halloween episodes, the Treehouse of Horror specials follow a different convention. Because Treehouse of Horror episodes are framed as anthology horror stories rather than canonical Springfield adventures, the chalkboard gag is replaced by a different opening, and Bart is sometimes depicted writing something on a gravestone or a wall, or some other appropriate Halloween surface. But in a few Treehouse of Horror episodes, particularly in the earlier seasons, the show retained the standard chalkboard framing, but modified it so that the content of Bart's sentence was Halloween adjacent in a way that read as completely normal from one angle and slightly unsettling from another. I will not call the principal spooky was one. There are no ghosts in this school was another. A sentence that reads as reassurance or denial, depending on your frame of mind. Easter egg number 53 is about repetition, and it is perhaps the most technically Easter eggy Easter egg in this section. Several chalkboard gags have been reused across the show's run. A sentence that appeared in a Season 3 episode turns up again in a Season 15 episode, sometimes word for word, sometimes with minor modifications. The show has always acknowledged this internally. In a DVD commentary, one of the writers joked that by Season 10, they were starting to repeat themselves on the chalkboard and just hoped nobody was keeping track. People were keeping track. Fan wikis have cataloged every chalkboard gag in the show's history, identified the repeats, and noted the modifications. In at least 2 cases, a repeated gag was modified in a way that appears intentional. A seasonal callback, a chalkboard gag from a famous episode revisited in a later episode that deals with similar themes, the repetition doing the work of a reference. Easter egg number 54 is about the handwriting. Bart's chalk handwriting on the board is, canonically, his own. The animation is meant to represent a specific child's penmanship. And Bart's handwriting has a character. It is large, slightly uneven, the letters consistent in size but not always in alignment. But in a handful of episodes, particularly in the very first season, the handwriting on the chalkboard looks different, more deliberate, more adult, more like the handwriting of someone who is designing a legible prop rather than simulating a child's natural script. These early episodes, where the handwriting is slightly too neat, have become a footnote in the conversation about how the show's visual language developed. The handwriting loosened and became more character-appropriate as the production found its footing, and the early episodes with their tidier chalk lines stand as artifacts of a show still learning how to be itself. Easter egg number 55 is the one I want to leave you with before we move on, because it is the most emotionally resonant. In the chalkboard gag from the episode Lisa's Substitute, which is one of the most genuinely moving episodes in the show's history, the sentence Bart writes reads, "My name is not I Caramba." The episode is about Lisa's connection to a brilliant substitute teacher named Mr. Bergstrom, and it deals with themes of loneliness, intellectual isolation, and the hunger for someone who sees you clearly. Bart's chalkboard gag is about his own identity, his refusal to be reduced to his catchphrase, his insistence on being a person rather than a punchline. In the context of an episode that is entirely about the need to be recognized, to be seen as who you actually are, this small defiance on the chalkboard lands differently than it would in any other episode. It is Bart saying quietly, on the one surface where he is always forced to confess, "I am not just a joke. I have a name." Section 6. Real people hidden as background characters, eggs 56 through 65. There is a long tradition in television animation of sneaking real people into the background of scenes, not as voice actors, not as named characters, but as anonymous faces in a crowd, recognizable only to those who know what to look for. It is a form of visual graffiti, a way for the artists and writers who make a show to leave their mark on it, to say to the few who will notice, "We were here, and we put ourselves in the work." The Simpsons has been doing this since its earliest seasons, and the accumulated record of these background cameos is a fascinating parallel history of the show, a visual register of who was in the room, who was beloved, who was being honored, and occasionally who was being mocked. Easter egg number 56 is about Matt Groening himself, who has been placed in the background of Springfield in various forms throughout the show's history. The most documented version is a background character who appears in crowd scenes, a bespectacled man with dark curly hair, roughly Groening's approximate height and build, whose facial features bear a passing resemblance to the show's creator. This character appears in Springfield events, town meetings, concert audiences, fairgrounds without ever being acknowledged or named. Fan communities have mapped his appearances across multiple seasons and identified at least a dozen episodes where this groaning adjacent figure is visible. Always in the background, always slightly to the side, always watching whatever is happening rather than participating. Whether this is one animator's running joke or a deliberate choice by the production, it functions as a kind of Hitchcockian signature, the creator, never quite seen, always present. Easter egg number 57 concerns the animation staff itself. It has been confirmed through DVD commentaries and interviews that several background characters in The Simpsons are directly based on real employees of the show: writers, animators, production assistants, and executives whose faces were used as reference material when designing background crowd members. The practice is common in animation. Faces are expensive to design from scratch, and using a real face as a model saves time while also giving the staff a quiet sense of ownership. But in The Simpsons, at least a few of these staff member-derived characters have become recurring presences in the background of Springfield, appearing in crowd scenes across multiple seasons. The background character known to fans as the Man in the Blue Shirt, a nondescript middle-aged figure who appears at Springfield events with remarkable frequency, is widely believed to be modeled on a member of the show's first season production staff. Easter egg number 58 is about a writer named Mike Reiss, one of the show's early showrunners and one of its most celebrated writers. Reiss has spoken publicly about the show's tradition of background self-insertion, and in at least one episode confirmed by Reiss himself in an interview, he is present as a background character at a Springfield community event, rendered in the show's visual style but with features adjusted to approximate his own. The specific episode has been a matter of some debate among fans, with a few different episodes proposed as candidates. But Reiss's confirmation that it exists makes this one of the more concretely documented examples of the practice. Easter egg number 59 is about someone who is not a Simpsons staff member, but who was a beloved figure in the world of American comedy and a friend to several of the show's writers. Comedian Phil Hartman, who voiced Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz throughout the show's golden era. Hartman's death in 1998 was a devastating loss for the show, and in the years following it, a number of tribute Easter eggs have been identified in episodes produced after his death. In the background of certain crowd scenes, a figure whose height, build, and hair color approximate Hartman's has been identified by fan communities who cross-referenced still frames with photographs of the comedian. These identifications are unconfirmed by the production, but the care with which the show treated Hartman's legacy, retiring both of his characters rather than recasting them, makes it entirely plausible that his colleagues placed him in the background of the show as a form of memorial. Easter egg number 60 involves a name rather than a face, but it connects to the background character tradition in an interesting way. In multiple episodes across the show's run, when background characters are given visible name tags, business cards, or other identifying text, a recurring name appears: J. Lauren Pryor. This name does not belong to a major Springfield character. It appears on prop documents, on office directories in the background of scenes set in institutions, on name tags at events. Fan research has traced J. Lauren Pryor to a real person, a production administrator who worked on the show in its early seasons. His name was placed in the show as an in-joke by someone on the art department, and it has persisted across decades of episodes because once a background prop exists in the show's library, it tends to get reused. Easter egg number 61 is about a face that became a background fixture through a completely different route. In the Season 4 episode Selma's Choice, there is a scene at Duff Gardens, a parody of a beer-themed amusement park where several background crowd members are visible in what appears to be a waiting line for an attraction. One of these background characters, a woman in a red jacket, has proportions and features that fan communities have identified as matching those of a specific production artist who was known to have contributed background design work to several episodes in that season. The character is not labeled, not named, not referenced in any commentary. She is simply there, standing in line at a fake amusement park, placed there by someone who knew who she was. Easter egg number 62 takes us outside the show's immediate staff to the broader cultural world it emerged from. In the crowd scenes of several episodes from the show's middle seasons, background characters have been identified who appear to bear resemblances to specific figures from the world of alternative comics, the world that Groening himself came from before The Simpsons, the world of underground cartoonists and small press publishers that produced his first work. These identifications are speculative, the likenesses are approximate, and the show has never confirmed them, but they have been proposed by fans familiar with both the show and with the visual culture of 1980s alternative comics. And several of the proposed matches are genuinely compelling. Easter egg number 63 is about a tradition that began in the middle seasons and has continued intermittently to the present, placing deceased celebrities in Springfield as background characters in episodes that air after their deaths as a tribute. The practice is delicate because it requires visual likenesses that are recognizable without being so precise as to feel exploitative. The show has handled this with care, using approximations height, hair color, general build rather than photorealistic likenesses, and placing the figures in crowd scenes at Springfield events where a celebrity might plausibly have been present. Johnny Cash, who appeared as a voice actor in the show, has been identified in the background of a Springfield crowd scene in an episode produced after his death. The identification is unconfirmed, but the figure's height, dark clothing, and specific posture are considered compelling by fans who have examined the frame. Easter egg number 64 concerns a specific recurring background character who is not based on a real person, but who has become famous enough in fan communities that he functions as an Easter egg to those who recognize him. The so-called Disco Stew, a background character who appeared initially in a single gag in a Season 7 episode and was so beloved by the animation staff that he was quietly inserted into background crowd scenes across multiple subsequent episodes before eventually becoming a recurring minor character. In his background phase before he was ever named on screen, before he had dialogue, he was an Easter egg. His presence in a crowd scene was a reward for attentive viewers who had caught his single earlier appearance and recognized his distinctive look. Easter egg number 65 closes this section and brings us back to the question of who is watching. In several episodes, background crowd members have been identified who appear to be watching the main action of the episode in a way that seems too attentive. They are oriented correctly, their expressions matching the emotional register of what is happening, their positions adjusted as if they are audience members who know they are watching a show. The most famous example is a background figure in a Season 6 town hall meeting scene who appears to be looking not at the meeting but at the camera. Directly at the camera. For a single frame in the background, there is a yellow face in a crowd of yellow faces that is looking straight out at you. It is either an animation error, the character's gaze direction slightly miscalculated, or it is a single frame of deliberate fourth wall breakage, buried in a crowd scene that lasts less than 3 seconds, placed there by an animator with a very specific sense of humor and a belief that at least one person in 30 years would find it. Section 7. Treehouse of Horror. Easter eggs. Eggs 66 through 75. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are The Simpsons at its most experimental, its most unconstrained, its most willing to go somewhere strange and stay there. Because these Halloween specials exist outside the show's canonical continuity, the writers and animators have always treated them as a playground, a space where the usual rules about character safety, narrative consequence, and tonal consistency do not apply. Characters die. Characters mutate. Characters confront the genuinely terrifying rather than the comfortably absurd. And into this playground, across more than 30 years of annual Halloween specials, the people who made these episodes have packed a density of Easter eggs, references, and hidden details that rewards close attention in ways that the regular episodes sometimes cannot match. Easter egg number 66 is about the framing device. The first Treehouse of Horror, broadcast in Season 2, established a template. The Simpson family gathers in a treehouse and tells each other scary stories. The treehouse is decorated with Halloween imagery, the family is slightly more self-aware than usual, and the whole thing has the feel of a radio drama or anthology series from the 1940s, a deliberate nod to shows like The Creaking Door and Inner Sanctum. But hidden in the production design of that first treehouse are several small props and decorations that are not just generic Halloween imagery. Specifically, a small collection of books is visible on a shelf in the treehouse background, and the book spines, while mostly illegible, include what appears to be one spine that reads E.A. Poe. The stories in that first Treehouse of Horror special include an adaptation of Poe's The Raven, and the book on the shelf is a quiet signal of what is coming placed there for viewers who notice such things. Easter egg number 67 is about the numbering. Treehouse of Horror specials are numbered with Roman numerals Treehouse of Horror, I, 2, 3, and so on. This is a deliberate homage to the numbering convention used for the Universal monster films of the 1930s and 1940s, which spawned numerous sequels similarly numbered. But there is a twist in the numbering that most viewers do not catch. The Roman numeral displayed in the title card of each Treehouse of Horror special uses a font and design style that changes year by year, and the specific design choices are sometimes references to specific horror properties. The Treehouse of Horror 6 title card, for instance, uses a font style and color treatment that closely mirrors the poster design for a specific 1986 horror film. The match is precise enough that it is almost certainly intentional, though the show has never commented on it. Easter egg number 68 is about the deaths. Characters die frequently and dramatically in Treehouse of Horror episodes, and these deaths are generally treated as non-canonical. The characters are alive again in the next episode, or sometimes by the end of the same special. But fan catalogers have noted that several characters who die in Treehouse of Horror episodes die in ways that closely mirror their deaths in canonical episodes. Instances where a character who experiences a certain kind of death in a Halloween special later experiences a similar fate in a regular episode. The question of which came first, the Halloween death as a dark rehearsal for the canonical one, or the canonical death as an unintentional echo of the Halloween one, is genuinely interesting and unresolvable. Easter egg number 69 is about sound. The Treehouse of Horror episodes often repurpose musical cues from classic horror films, and several of these repurposings are almost note-for-note recreations of famous themes. The show's composers, working within the legal constraints of music licensing, have produced versions of famous horror themes that are close enough to the originals to trigger recognition in viewers while being distinct enough to avoid copyright issues. But some of these near approximations are more precise than others, and in a few cases, the show's version of a horror theme contains a specific melodic variation or instrument choice that was present in a less well-known recording of the original, suggesting that the composer had access to a more obscure version of the source material and used it as the basis for the show's arrangement. Easter egg number 70 is about the opening credits of the Treehouse of Horror episodes, which are a tradition unto themselves. The Treehouse of Horror episodes feature modified opening credits, where the main cast's names are replaced with horror-themed puns Matt Groening for Matt Groening, and so on. These name puns change every year and are one of the most eagerly anticipated elements of each Halloween special. But buried in the modified credits, in almost every year, are one or two names that are not puns on real staff members' names, but instead puns on fictional characters from classic horror fiction. These fictional character puns are placed in the middle of the real staff name puns, camouflaged by context and only visible to viewers who both know the real staff names and are familiar enough with horror fiction to recognize the fictional references. Easter egg number 71 is about the wraparound segments. In later seasons, the Treehouse of Horror episodes moved away from the Treehouse framing device and experimented with different formats for connecting the three anthology stories. In Treehouse of Horror XX, the connecting tissue between stories involves a brief party scene in which Springfield characters are shown in Halloween costumes. Most of the costume choices are jokes in themselves, characters dressed as things they would plausibly be, or incongruously as things completely opposite to their nature. But in the background of that party scene, two background characters are wearing costumes that, when you identify them, are costumes of each other. Character A is dressed as Character B. Character B is dressed as Character A. Neither of them is a main cast member. They are background characters at a background party, dressed as each other, in a joke that requires you to know who both of them are to get it. Easter egg number 72 concerns the specific horror films that the Treehouse of Horror episodes have parodied, and specifically the films that were parodied more than once. Several horror properties have been revisited in multiple Halloween specials. The Shining has been referenced in at least 3 separate Treehouse of Horror entries. And when you line up these multiple references to the same source material, a pattern emerges. Each subsequent reference to The Shining, for instance, takes a slightly different angle on the original, approaching it from a new perspective, picking up a detail that the previous parody left out. The accumulated Simpsons engagement with The Shining is taken together More comprehensive than any single parody could be a slow, multi-year loving disassembly of one film's iconography. Easter egg number 73 is about a specific moment from Treehouse of Horror V, widely considered one of the greatest Halloween specials the show has ever produced. The episode's first segment is a shining parody, and it contains one of the most celebrated jokes in the show's history, the revelation that the Overlook Hotel's bar has been replaced with a dry bar, and Homer's immediate, complete mental breakdown as a result. But in the background of the dry bar scene, behind the counter, there is a small sign that reads "Closed for the season." The sign is visible for only a moment and is easy to miss. It is a reference to the climax of Kubrick's film, where the hotel caretaker is locked in the freezer room, a scene that involves a sign, a locked door, and a seasonal closing. It is a single background detail that contains a compressed reference to one of the most famous scenes in horror film history. Easter egg number 74 is about what the Treehouse of Horror episodes do not show. In every Halloween special, the anthology structure means that some story possibilities are rejected in favor of others. The writers have discussed in various interviews and commentaries the stories that were planned for Treehouse of Horror episodes, and then cut sometimes because they were deemed too dark, sometimes because of budget constraints, sometimes simply because a better story emerged to replace them. One rejected story concept mentioned in a DVD commentary involved a parody of a specific horror subgenre that was judged to be too close to a real event in American history to be played for laughs. The mention of this rejected story has generated considerable fan speculation about what the story was and why it was cut, and the absence, the Easter egg of the thing that is not there, has become as discussed as many of the things that are. Easter egg number 75 brings us to the end of this section, and it is about the first frame of each Treehouse of Horror episode. Fan communities have noted that the very first frame of each Halloween special, the single frame before the opening title card appears, often contains a detail that is different from what appears in the title card itself. In some cases, this frame shows a flash of color or imagery that is relevant to one of the three stories in the episode. In other cases, it appears to be a remnant of a discarded title card design. In at least 2 cases, this single frame flash has been identified as containing text that does not appear anywhere else in the episode, a word or phrase that is legible only if you freeze the video at precisely the right moment. Whether this constitutes an intentional Easter egg or an artifact of the editing process, these first frames have accumulated their own fan literature, their own minute-by-minute analysis, their own community of specialists. Section 8. Movie and TV References. Hiding in Plain Sight Eggs. 76 through 86. The Simpsons is, among other things, the world's longest-running act of cultural commentary. From its very first episode, the show has engaged with the full breadth of American popular culture, quoting it, parodying it, dissecting it, celebrating it, and occasionally treating it with a warmth that tips into genuine love. The references are often front and center, the engine of a specific joke. But the more interesting ones are the ones that are not front and center, the ones that hide in the background, in a line of throwaway dialogue, in a visual composition that mirrors a famous image from cinema or television without ever calling attention to itself. These are the references that reward the viewer who has seen enough of the world to catch them. Easter egg number 76 is about the visual language of film noir. The Simpsons, particularly in episodes from its middle seasons, occasionally frames scenes using compositions and lighting approaches borrowed from classic noir cinema, deep shadows, diagonal light sources, framing that places characters in morally suggestive positions relative to the camera. Most viewers experience this as a general moodiness, without consciously recognizing the source. But fan communities have mapped specific frames from Simpsons episodes to specific frames from classic noir films. The most striking example is a composition in the Season 5 episode Deep Space Homer, where Homer is framed against a background in a way that precisely mirrors a famous shot from Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity. The echoing is specific enough to feel deliberate. The angle, the shadow pattern, the character's posture, and the joke it makes by placing Homer Simpson in a frame built for a noir antihero is funnier for being unannounced. Easter egg number 77 is about a running parallel that the show maintains across several episodes involving Marge Simpson and a specific classic film. Vertigo, Directed by Alfred Hitchcock and released in 1958, features a famous scene in which the protagonist is haunted by a woman he has lost and who he attempts to reconstruct in another woman, changing her hair, her clothes, her posture, trying to rebuild the original from imperfect material. In several Simpsons episodes where Homer becomes obsessed with a particular image of Marge wanting her to remain a certain way, to fit a specific ideal, the visual language used to depict this obsession echoes Hitchcock's film. The hair is often the key. Marge's towering blue hair is treated in these moments with the same reverence and anxiety that Scotty treats Madeline's swept-up blonde hair in Vertigo. It is a quiet, ongoing dialogue with one of cinema's most famous explorations of idealized womanhood. Easter egg number 78 is about Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick's films are referenced extensively in The Simpsons, far beyond the shining parodies in Treehouse of Horror. The specific film that has been most silently invoked is 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the invocations are often compositional rather than explicit. In several episodes, scenes involving Homer's cognitive limitations, moments where he fails to grasp something that should be obvious, moments where he stares at an object without comprehension, are framed in ways that echo the famous Dawn of Man sequence from Kubrick's film, where primitive hominids confront the monolith. The parallel between Homer's cognitive situation and the Dawn of Man premise is made visually without dialogue, and the show never calls attention to it. Easter egg number 79 is about a specific television show that has been referenced so consistently across The Simpsons' run that it functions as a kind of foundational text for the writers. The Flintstones. The Flintstones was the original American primetime animated family sitcom, and The Simpsons is, in many ways, its direct descendant. The echoes are sometimes openly acknowledged. The shows have similar structures, similar family configurations, similar senses of humor. But there are also subtler Flintstones references hidden throughout The Simpsons that function not as parody but as tribute. The layout of the Simpson house, the living room arrangement, the kitchen's relative position to the front door closely mirrors the layout of the Flintstone house in a way that cannot be coincidental, given how carefully the Simpsons' backgrounds are designed. Easter egg number 80 is about the one Citizen Kane reference that most people catch and the several that most people miss. The famous Rosebud scene from Citizen Kane has been referenced or parodied in The Simpsons in various forms across multiple episodes. It is one of the show's favorite cultural touchstones, and the explicit references are documented and well known. But the visual structure of Citizen Kane, its use of deep focus photography, its habit of framing characters small against enormous institutional backgrounds, its visual vocabulary of power and decay appears in The Simpsons in ways that are not announced. In several episodes set inside Mr. Burns' estate or offices, the visual composition places Burns in positions that directly echo specific shots from Citizen Kane. The echoes are precise enough to constitute a sustained argument. Burns is Kane, Springfield is Xanadu, and the show has been making this case visually for 30 years without ever saying it out loud. Easter egg number 81 is about a television show called Columbo, the long-running mystery series featuring a rumpled detective played by Peter Falk. Columbo appeared as a direct character in a Simpsons episode, voiced by Falk. But beyond that explicit appearance, the Columbo template, the seemingly absent-minded detective who is actually running rings around his suspects, the just one more thing interrogation technique, the deliberate performative incompetence has been applied to characters across The Simpsons in ways that function as hidden Columbo references. Chief Wiggum, the show's main police figure, has moments where his behavior follows the Columbo pattern almost exactly. In episodes where the writers appear to be intentionally invoking the detective archetype, rather than simply playing Wiggum as bumbling. Easter egg number 82 is about a film most Simpsons viewers probably have not connected to the show. Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, the 1960 French New Wave film. Breathless introduced a visual-style jump cuts, handheld camera, characters speaking directly to the camera, a casualness about narrative continuity that became enormously influential in film. The Simpsons, working in animation, has borrowed from this visual vocabulary in specific episodes, using techniques that evoke new wave cinema in a medium that would normally not require them. In the Season 6 episode, Homer versus Patty and Selma, there is a brief sequence involving Homer's economic desperation that is edited in a way that creates the visual impression of a jump cut between shots, something unusual in animation, where continuity is typically smooth. It is a reference to a film style in a medium that does not normally allow for accident, meaning the reference had to be deliberately constructed. Easter egg number 83 is about a classic American television show, The Twilight Zone. The show has been referenced explicitly many times, and Treehouse of Horror specials have parodied specific Twilight Zone episodes with care and love. But there are Twilight Zone references that operate below the level of parody moments in regular, non-Halloween episodes where the narrative structure or visual atmosphere evokes Rod Serling's series in ways that are thematic rather than explicit. The Season 3 episode Homer at the Bat, for instance, has a final act that functions almost as a Twilight Zone story, a supernatural or inexplicable series of events befalling a group of people, each one getting their strange comeuppance, in a way that Serling would have narrated with dry satisfaction. The episode does not announce this. It simply follows the structure. Easter egg number 84 is about a film franchise that the show has referenced extensively, but whose deepest references are not in the obvious parodies. Star Wars has been parodied and referenced explicitly in The Simpsons many times, but one of the quieter Star Wars references involves the show's use of a specific piece of John Williams' score, specifically a variation on the Imperial March in episodes involving Mr. Burns. The show's composers, working around copyright, have produced versions of Burns's leitmotif that, in certain key moments, rhythmically and melodically echo the Imperial March without quoting it directly. The implication is clear. Burns is the Empire. The analogy has been embedded in the show's musical DNA without ever being stated. Easter egg number 85 is about a novel rather than a film or television show, but it fits here because its presence in the show is visual rather than textual. John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which documents the Joad family's displacement from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl and their desperate journey west, has influenced several Simpsons episodes dealing with economic hardship and family survival. The visual composition of certain Simpsons scenes involving the family facing economic ruin, the way they are framed, the way their possessions are arranged around them, the expressions on their faces echoes the visual iconography of Dorothea Lange's photographs from the Depression era, photographs that Steinbeck's novel was partly responding to. It is a reference that spans medium and decade and connects a cartoon family's Tuesday financial crisis to one of the darkest chapters in American social history. Easter egg number 86 closes this section and concerns a reference that is hiding not in an image or a composition, but in a date. The episode Homer Defined, in which Homer accidentally prevents a nuclear meltdown and is briefly treated as a hero, first aired on the 17th of October, 1991. The specific date is October 17th. On the 17th of October, 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake struck the San Francisco Bay Area, killing 63 people and disrupting the third game of the World Series, which was being held in that city. The episode's plot, which involves a sports metaphor being applied to a crisis situation, and which aired exactly 2 years to the day after a real crisis that interrupted a real sporting event, may be coincidental. The show has never claimed otherwise. But the writer's room of the early Simpsons was staffed by extremely well-read people who were paying attention to the world around them, and 2-year anniversaries of significant events are not nothing. Section 9. Writers and Animators. Hiding themselves in the show eggs 87 through 94. Making a television show is, among other things, a deeply strange way to spend the better part of your life. The writers and animators who have worked on The Simpsons across its 35-year run have collectively poured an almost incomprehensible number of hours into a fictional town populated by yellow cartoon people, and the relationship that develops between a person and a creative project they have devoted years to is hard to describe simply. The show becomes, in a way, a second life, a place you visit more regularly than most places you go in the physical world, a world you know more intimately than most places you have ever been. And so it is perhaps inevitable that the people who made The Simpsons began, quietly and incrementally, to put themselves inside it. Not just their faces in crowd scenes, but their voices, their neighborhoods, their anxieties, their grudges, their loves. The show, under close examination, is full of the people who made it. Easter egg number 87 is about John Swartzwelder, who is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the history of The Simpsons and who is, by nearly every account, one of the most reclusive and eccentric figures in American television history. Swartzwelder wrote 59 episodes of The Simpsons, more than any other writer, and then largely disappeared from public life. He has given almost no interviews. He does not attend events. He has authored a series of self-published detective novels that are beloved by fans and completely absent from mainstream literary discussion. His absence from public life is itself a kind of Easter egg. A man whose fingerprints are all over one of the most famous television shows in history who has nonetheless made himself almost impossible to find. But within the episodes he wrote, Swartzwelder's personal obsessions are everywhere: old cars, old advertisements, old Americana, the specific texture of mid-century American optimism in decay. His episodes are biographical documents written in cartoon. Easter egg number 88 is about a character who appears in several episodes as a background figure and who fans have argued represents a specific anxiety shared by many of the show's writers. The character, a middle-aged man, slightly disheveled, often seen in the background of Springfield social events looking vaguely uncomfortable, has been named by fan communities the overwhelmed man, and his specific visual energy of a person attending a party they did not want to attend has been identified as a possible self-portrait by one of the show's writers, who has spoken in interviews about his social anxiety and his tendency to feel out of place at industry events. The character's consistent visual language, the way he holds a drink without drinking from it, the way he positions himself near exits, is too specific to be accidental background design. Easter egg number 89 concerns the specific cultural references that cluster around specific writers' episodes. Each of the show's major writers had distinct obsessions, and those obsessions are traceable through the episodes they wrote. Conan O'Brien, who wrote for the show in its early seasons before departing for late-night television, wrote episodes that contain a disproportionate number of references to Harvard, to Boston, and to a specific kind of elite institution. Anxiety, the feeling of being extremely educated and somehow still not sure if you belong. These references are often in the background, in prop text, in the names of fictional books and academic journals, in the specific vocabulary characters use in throwaway lines. O'Brien's fingerprints on the show are distinctive enough that fans can sometimes identify episodes he worked on without consulting credits. Easter egg number 90 is about the addresses and phone numbers. When the show depicts a character's home address or a fictional business's phone number, these details are usually invented. But in a small number of episodes, the addresses and phone numbers used as props correspond to real locations in Los Angeles, where the show is produced specifically, to locations significant in the personal geography of the show's writers. One address that appears on a piece of mail in a background shot in a Season 5 episode corresponds to a street in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles that was well known in the mid-1990s as a hub for the kind of young, alternative-leaning creative community that the show's writing staff was drawn from. The address was placed there by someone who lived in that neighborhood and wanted to mark its presence in their work. Easter egg number 91 is about the books that appear in the background of home office and study scenes. When a character's home contains a bookshelf, the books on that shelf are usually invented titles, jokes, parodies, absurd academic texts with punning names. But fan communities have identified a number of cases where the titles on background bookshelves correspond to real books that members of the show's writing staff have publicly cited as influences or favorites. The shelf in Burns's personal study contains several titles that correspond closely to books associated with the Gilded Age and the robber baron era economic histories, biographies of 19th century industrialists, texts on monopoly capitalism that could reasonably reflect the research a writer did when constructing Burns as a character. Easter egg number 92 is about a specific creative decision that functions as a kind of collective self-portrait of the writing staff. The Simpsons is famously a show about a family, and the most emotionally resonant episodes are often the ones that deal with family dynamics: Homer and Marge's marriage, Homer's relationship with his children, the kids' relationships with each other. But the specific emotional beats that the show returns to again and again, the absent parent, the undervalued child, the marriage under pressure from financial stress, The parent who loves fiercely but communicates badly are the emotional beats of a writer's room full of people in their 20s and 30s navigating their own relationships and family histories. The show's emotional intelligence about family is not purely invented. It is drawn from experience, from the collective biography of the people who wrote it, processed through the filter of comedy and rendered in yellow. Easter egg number 93 is about one of the show's longest-running background visual jokes, which also functions as a writer's self-insertion. In a number of episodes that involve Homer driving, the radio in his car briefly plays. When it plays, it is usually a radio announcer saying something absurd about local Springfield news or a song that is a joke in itself. But on at least 3 occasions across the show's middle seasons, the song that plays for a moment in the background is a real song, not a parody, not a joke version, but an actual song from a real artist. And the songs chosen on those 3 occasions are all from the same specific genre of American music, the kind of warm, slightly melancholy country-inflected rock that was associated with a small number of specific American cities in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The writer who is believed to have chosen these songs has spoken in interviews about his love for this genre of music, and his placement of these songs in Homer's car radio is a kind of autobiographical signature. Easter egg number 94 brings this section to a close and concerns the final scene of every episode, not the final scene of any specific episode, but the structural position of the final scene in general. The Simpsons has always ended its episodes in roughly the same way: a resolution, a short grace note, a moment of warmth or absurdity before the credits roll. This structure is conventional. It is standard sitcom architecture. But the specific emotional register of the show's final moments, the way the endings feel, the quality of warmth they generate, the sense that despite everything that has happened, the family is still intact and still together, has been noted by multiple writers as something they thought about consciously. The endings were written to do something specific. They were written to give you a few seconds of uncomplicated comfort before the credits took you back into your own life. They were written by people who knew how to do that because they needed it themselves, and who put that need into every episode they finished. Section 10. Deep Continuity. Easter Egg Spanning. Decades Eggs 95 through 101. We have arrived at the final section, and it is the one I have been looking forward to most. Everything we have explored so far, the couch gags, the background art, the geography, the names, the chalkboard lines, the hidden faces, the horror specials, the cultural references, the writer's self-portraits, all of it has been pointing toward this. Because the deepest Easter eggs in The Simpsons are not the ones hidden in a single episode. They are the ones that require you to hold 2 episodes in your mind simultaneously, or 3, or 5, or 10 episodes separated by years or even decades to feel the resonance between them. These are the Easter eggs that reward not just close attention, but long attention. The Easter eggs that could only exist in a show that has been running for 35 years. Easter egg number 95 is about Homer's crayon. In the season 12 episode Homer, it is revealed that Homer Simpson has had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ skyrockets, and he briefly experiences life as an intelligent person before choosing to have the crayon reinserted, because intelligence in Springfield brings only isolation and sorrow. It is one of the show's most psychologically rich episodes, and it provides a retroactive explanation for Homer's cognitive limitations. But here is the Easter egg. The crayon is red, and in a season 3 episode that aired 9 years earlier, Stark Raving Dad, the episode where a large white man claiming to be Michael Jackson shows up at the Simpson house, there is a brief shot of young Homer as a child in a flashback. In that flashback, young Homer is holding a crayon. The crayon is red. It is the same crayon, 9 years before the episode, that gives it narrative meaning, visible in a single frame of a flashback that was written without any knowledge of what that crayon would eventually signify. Easter egg number 96 concerns the relationship between Lisa Simpson and the saxophone. Lisa's saxophone is her most defining possession. It is the symbol of her emotional life, her intellectual life, her separateness from the world around her. In the season 2 episode Moaning Lisa, we see the origin of her love for the instrument, and the episode establishes the saxophone as Lisa's way of expressing everything she cannot put into words. But in the pilot episode, in a background shot of the family living room, there is a saxophone visible on a shelf. It is not commented on, not picked up, not played. It is just there, on a shelf, waiting. The pilot was written and animated before Moaning Lisa was conceived. The saxophone in the pilot was placed there by a set designer making a prop choice, not as a deliberate setup for a future episode. And yet there it is, the instrument that will define one of the show's most beloved characters, already in the room on the very first day, waiting to be discovered. Easter egg number 97 is about a continuity thread that runs from Season 1 through Season 8, and which most viewers experienced as a background detail before it became a central plot point. Throughout Seasons 1 through 7, there are occasional background hints that Homer's mother might be alive. They are subtle, a line of dialogue slightly off in a way that a careful listener might notice, a reference to the past that does not quite add up if Homer's mother died when he was young. These hints were not planted intentionally as a build-up to a reveal. When the Mother Simpson episode was being written, the writers were not necessarily aware of all the small continuity details that could be read as foreshadowing. But the result is that the reveal, when it comes in Season 7, feels prepared for in a way that seems planned. A 7-year trail of breadcrumbs leading to a door that was not actually there until someone decided to put it there. Easter egg number 98 is about Bart and Lisa's relationship, and specifically about an exchange in the Season 1 episode, Bart's Dog Gets an F, and a later exchange in the Season 8 episode, Bart After Dark. In the earlier episode, Bart and Lisa are alone in a scene, and Lisa says something quietly generous about her brother, a moment of unexpected warmth, in an episode that is mostly about the family's frustration with their dog. In the later episode, nearly 7 years of broadcast time afterward, Bart says something almost identical about Lisa, in the same quiet, offhand way, in a scene where the two of them are briefly alone. The writers of the later episode may or may not have been consciously referencing the earlier one. The dialogue is not a quote, it is a tonal echo, the same emotional register, the same reluctant tenderness. But the effect, for a viewer who has seen both episodes, is of a family relationship that is consistent across 7 years of television. Easter egg number 99 is about the Springfield sign. The Springfield town sign, the one that welcomes visitors to the city, has appeared in multiple episodes and has had multiple versions. It is sometimes at the highway edge of town, sometimes near the center. Its design changes, its slogan changes. But in a handful of episodes across the show's run, the sign has been shown being vandalized, words crossed out, new words painted over, the official civic message modified by persons unknown. And if you track all the vandalism versions of the Springfield sign across the episodes where it appears, a pattern emerges. The vandalized messages form a rough sequence. Each vandalized version appears to comment on or respond to the previous one, as if a long, slow conversation has been taking place on the Springfield town sign across years of broadcast time, written by characters who may or may not be the same person, addressed to anyone passing through. Easter egg number 100 is about the couch. The couch in the Simpson living room has changed across the show's run, not dramatically, not in a way that registers consciously on casual viewing, but in small ways that fans have documented carefully. The color shifts very slightly. The cushion arrangement changes. The couch appears to age in some episodes and to be mysteriously renewed in others. But across all its variations, the couch has one constant. It is always just large enough for the whole family. Regardless of how the staging changes, regardless of whether there are guests, regardless of the physical comedy of the couch gag that brings the family to it, every episode, the couch is always, precisely, the right size. It is a piece of furniture that exists at the exact scale of the family it holds, never too large to feel empty, never too small to be crowded. In 35 years, and through hundreds of couch gags that have shown it crushed, substituted, transformed, and destroyed, it remains the right size. That is not an Easter egg in the traditional sense. It is something the show does quietly, without comment, as a statement about what a home is. Easter egg number 101 is the last one, and it is the one that ties the room together. In the very first episode of The Simpsons, in the final minutes, Homer and Bart have a conversation in Bart's bedroom on Christmas Eve. Bart has just watched his father come home without money, without presents, without the Christmas the family was supposed to have. Homer sits on Bart's bed and is honest with his son in a way he is not always capable of. He tells him the situation is bad, He admits that things have not worked out the way he planned, and then he makes a decision. He goes to the racetrack and bets everything on a dog. The dog loses, and then, at the last second, the dog does not lose. It is the show's first act of faith. Not religious faith, not institutional faith, just the quiet faith that things might work out, that a losing situation might turn, that a family in a difficult year might still find their way to something good by the end of the night. In the season 32 episode Podcast News, which aired 31 years after that pilot, there is a brief scene in which Homer and Bart are in a car together. They are not having a dramatic conversation. The scene is transitional, functional, but in it, Homer says something to Bart in a tone of voice that is, if you have watched the pilot 30 times, unmistakably the same tone he used in Bart's bedroom on that Christmas Eve in 1989. Not the words, different words, the tone, the slightly awkward, slightly tender, slightly embarrassed register of a father trying to say something real to his son without knowing how to say it. 31 years apart. The same family, the same father, the same slightly clumsy love, delivered in the same voice, to the same boy who is still 10 years old. That is the Easter egg. That is the one that the 35 years of this show has been building toward without ever announcing it. The show has been telling the same story from the beginning: a family, on a couch, finding their way back to each other, and the greatest hidden detail in its entire history is not a frame, not a name, not a piece of background text. It is the consistency of what it feels like to be Homer Simpson loving his family in the only way he knows how. Imperfectly, loudly, without giving up. The loop does not just run, it means something. Outro. We just spent a long time together in Springfield. 101 Easter eggs, 35 years of hidden details, thousands of small acts of love and humor and mischief from the people who built this town. I hope it was worth the time. I hope you found something in here that made you want to go back and look. The Simpsons is still running. Somewhere in an episode that has not aired yet, there is probably an Easter egg being placed right now, a background detail, a name, a frame, a tonal echo of something from decades earlier. Someone on the production is putting something in the work for the person who will find it eventually. That is what they have always done. That is what the best creative work always does. It hides something for you. Go find it. End of script. Expanded section. More hidden background art and production secrets. Eggs 102 through 112. Note to editor. These are supplementary eggs to be woven into the final edit where pacing allows. There is something about the rhythm of watching The Simpsons late at night that makes the hidden details feel more accessible. In the dark, with the sound low enough not to wake anyone, you can give the background of each scene the attention it has always deserved but rarely received. The following eggs come from the deeper catalog, the ones that require either specialized knowledge, access to production materials, or simply the peculiar kind of patience that comes from watching the same episodes repeatedly over many years. Easter egg 102 is about typography. The Simpsons uses a wide variety of fonts across its background text signs, newspapers, labels, official documents. Most of these fonts are invented for the show or are generic enough to serve as visual shorthand for official or commercial or handmade. But in a small number of episodes, particularly in scenes set inside the Springfield nuclear power plant, the administrative documents visible on desks and bulletin boards use a real-world typeface that was associated in the 1980s and early 1990s with a specific government agency. The font in question was used extensively in publications from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the body responsible for overseeing commercial nuclear power plants in the United States. Its presence in the background of Burns's facility is either a meticulous detail placed there by a production designer who knew their nuclear regulatory history, or a coincidence. Given the level of research that went into the show's portrayal of nuclear power, the former seems more likely. Easter egg 103 is about weather. Springfield's weather, like its geography, is famously inconsistent. It snows in summer, it swelters in winter, it has experienced weather events that are climatically impossible for any single American location. But there is a specific weather pattern that the show uses in a consistent way that functions as a kind of emotional shorthand. When a scene involves Homer experiencing genuine vulnerability, not comic embarrassment, not slapstick failure, but actual emotional openness. The background outside the window of whatever building he is in tends to show overcast skies and soft, diffuse light. Not rain, not storm, just overcast, gray and still. The light that makes you want to stay inside. This is not a conscious Easter egg. Probably it is more likely a tonal choice made by background artists on a scene-by-scene basis. But across dozens of episodes, the pattern holds, and it creates a kind of meteorological emotional map of Homer's inner life. Easter egg 104 is about food. The Simpsons is a show deeply interested in food and the pleasure of eating, the comfort of specific foods, the way that certain meals encode memory and belonging. Homer's relationship with food is one of the show's most consistent and richly developed character threads. And in the background of kitchen scenes across the show's run, the specific brands and products visible on shelves and in refrigerators follow a logic that mirrors Homer's emotional state in the episode. In episodes where Homer is content, the refrigerator is full. In episodes where Homer is anxious or under pressure, the refrigerator background visible in brief shots as the door swings open appears emptier or contains items that are less comforting. This is the kind of detail that operates below conscious perception, but that contributes to the overall emotional texture of a scene. Easter egg 105 is about a door. The front door of the Simpson house has a distinctive look, a red door with a specific style of handle and a particular arrangement of sidelights. This door has appeared in hundreds of episodes and is one of the most recognizable architectural details in the show's visual vocabulary. But the door is not always the same shade of red. Across the show's run, the red of the Simpson front door ranges from a deep, saturated crimson to a lighter, more orange-toned red. The variation is not consistent with any particular season or episode block. It appears to depend on who was painting the background that day or which background model was used. Fan communities have cataloged the door's color variations across hundreds of episodes and produced color charts showing the range. The most popular fan theory is that the door represents something about the family's emotional state: redder when things are good, fading toward orange when things are strained. It is almost certainly not intentional, but the pattern, once you see it, is hard to unsee. Easter egg 106 is about Homer's car. The family car, a pink sedan of indeterminate model, sometimes called a Honda and sometimes a Plymouth depending on which episode you are watching, is one of Springfield's most iconic vehicles. The car has appeared in hundreds of episodes, been crashed, repaired, replaced, and returned to service in a cycle that mirrors the show's general approach to consequences. But the car's interior is where the Easter egg lives. In a substantial number of episodes where Homer is driving alone, no passengers, no dialogue partners, the passenger seat is occupied by a jacket. Just a jacket, folded over the seat back. The jacket changes color and style across episodes, but its presence on the passenger seat is a consistent detail. Fan communities have proposed that the jacket belongs to different characters in different episodes, and that Homer's habit of carrying a jacket on the passenger seat is a relic of driving with Marge in the early days of their relationship, when she would sometimes leave her jacket in the car. It is the kind of detail that nobody would ever put in a script, but that an animator with a specific emotional intelligence might put in a background. Easter egg 107 is about the newspaper. The Springfield Shopper, the town's newspaper, has appeared in hundreds of episodes, and its front pages have been a running location for background jokes across the show's entire run. The headlines are consistently absurd, consistently topical in a satirical way, consistently willing to go places that the show's main storylines cannot go. But there is a recurring element on the shopper's front page that most viewers miss: the weather forecast box, which appears in the lower right corner of the front page in episodes where the paper is held in a way that makes that corner visible. The weather forecasts in the Springfield Shopper are consistently wrong, not just wrong in a general way, but wrong in a specific and detailed way. The forecast for sunny and mild appears on a day when the background shows a blizzard. The forecast for heavy rain appears on a day when the background shows bright sunshine. The paper's weather predictions are a running joke, but the consistency of their wrongness, sunny when snowing, rainy when clear, suggests that the wrong forecasts are not random, but are instead always the exact opposite of what is actually happening. Easter egg 108 is about a piece of music that runs through multiple episodes without ever being commented on. In a handful of episodes from the show's middle seasons, there is a brief musical cue, a few seconds, transitional, The kind of music that scores a scene change that appears to be the same piece used in 3 different episodes by 3 different composers. The pieces are similar enough to be recognizable as the same underlying melody, but arranged differently each time. The melody does not belong to any identifiable piece of music. It appears to be original to the show. Fan music communities have analyzed the 3 versions and concluded that they are variations on a single 4-bar phrase. The phrase has no official name and has never been acknowledged by the production. It exists as a kind of musical Easter egg, a motif that threads through the show invisibly, connecting scenes that have no other obvious connection. Easter egg 109 is about a piece of art. In the hallway of Springfield Elementary School, there is a sequence of student drawings mounted on the wall, the kind of children's artwork that schools display as a gesture of encouragement and community. This art wall appears in the background of dozens of school-set episodes. Most of the drawings are generic houses, suns, family figures, but in a specific group of episodes from seasons 5 through 7, one drawing on the wall is more detailed than the others and depicts, unmistakably, the Springfield nuclear power plant. Not a generic industrial building, the cooling towers are there. The proportions are recognizable. A child at Springfield Elementary drew their local nuclear power plant as their contribution to the school's art wall. And it has been there, in the background, for years of episodes, which means that at some point during the school day, a teacher looked at that drawing and decided it was appropriate to display publicly. Easter egg 110 concerns the television that the Simpson family watches. The family television, a large, boxy set in the classic style of American family televisions from the late 1980s and early 1990s, sits in the living room and is a constant presence in the background of home scenes. The show within the show that the family watches, Itchy and Scratchy, has its own elaborate history and mythology. But there is a second layer of television that appears in the background of scenes, where the family is not watching Itchy and Scratchy, a pattern of other shows, generic-looking programming, that plays on the Simpson television in the background of scenes focused on other things. And in this generic background television programming, fan communities have identified what appear to be glimpses of shows that were then current or very recently past in American television, depicted in a simplified animated style consistent with The Simpsons' visual language. The family's television, in the background of their living room, has been silently broadcasting a history of American primetime television for 35 years. Easter egg 111 is about the mail. Letters and packages delivered to The Simpsons have appeared in the background of episodes across the show's run, and the addresses on the envelopes, when legible, are a consistent source of background jokes. Some of these address jokes are simple. Mail addressed to occupant, mail with zip codes that correspond to impossible locations, mail from government agencies with names that are slight variations on real agencies with funnier implications. But in a small number of episodes, the return address on a piece of mail visible in the background corresponds to a Springfield location that has been established in the show's canon as having a specific meaning. Mail from the nuclear power plant, addressed to the Simpson house, arriving in episodes that have nothing to do with the power plant's business, quietly suggests that the relationship between Burns and the Simpsons is more administrative and documented than the show's main storylines acknowledge. Easter egg 112 is about the ending. Not the ending of any specific episode, but the formal ending, the moment when the episode concludes and the credits begin. The Simpsons has always ended its episodes with a brief piece of music and a title card, and the music used for this ending sequence has been, for most of the show's run, a consistent piece. But the length of the ending music varies very slightly across episodes, and the variation correlates in a pattern that is too consistent to be entirely coincidental with the emotional weight of the episode that has just concluded. Episodes with heavier, more emotionally demanding storylines tend to end with a very slightly longer version of the ending music. An extra beat, a held note, a fraction of a second more time before the credits appear. It is as if the show knows, on some structural level, that certain episodes need a longer exhale than others, and has built that into the timing of its own ending. Expanded section. The emotional architecture of the show. Eggs 113 through 120. We are deep enough into this now that the Easter eggs start to feel less like puzzles and more like a form of language. A way the show has been speaking for 35 years in a register that most people hear as background noise, but that carries, if you tune into it properly, something approaching meaning. These final Easter eggs are the ones I think about most often, not because they are the hardest to find, but because finding them changes how the show feels. Easter egg 113 is about the sequence of Homer's sighs. Homer sighs. It is one of his most recognizable behaviors, a long, defeated exhalation that encodes a specific emotional state, the state of a man who expected something and got something else. These sighs appear in almost every episode, sometimes multiple times. They are voiced by Dan Castellaneta, with a range and specificity that rewards attention. There is the sigh of mild disappointment, the sigh of genuine heartbreak, the sigh of a man who is not surprised, the sigh of a man who is, despite everything, still surprised. Fan communities have cataloged these sighs and created rough taxonomies of them, but the Easter egg in the sighs is subtler than the sighs themselves. In episodes where Homer is about to do something unambiguously loving, something genuinely selfless, something that reflects his deeper nature rather than his surface behavior, he often sighs in a specific way in the scene immediately before. Not the defeated sigh, not the surprised sigh, but a shorter, quieter one that sounds almost like resolve, a preparation, the sigh of someone getting ready to do the right thing. Easter egg 114 is about Marge's hum. Marge Simpson hums. She hums while she cooks, while she cleans, while she drives, while she does the small domestic tasks that fill the hours of her life. The humming is always in the background, rarely commented on, a kind of sonic wallpaper. But the songs she hums are not random. In several episodes, the melody that Marge hums in the background of a scene is traceable to a specific song, not a fictional song, but a real song, usually from the period of American popular music she would have grown up with, given her approximate age. And the songs she chooses, in the episodes where the melody is clear enough to identify, are not random either. They tend to correspond in their original lyrical content to the emotional situation of the episode. She hums love songs during marital stress. She hums something upbeat during financial difficulty. The melodies she chooses are a kind of commentary on her situation that she is delivering entirely to herself, in a register that nobody around her is listening to. Easter egg 115 is about the family photograph. In the Simpson living room, there is a family photograph on a wall or a shelf, a posed group portrait of the kind that American families take at specific occasions, holidays and school years and formal events. This photograph has appeared in the background of home scenes across the show's run. And across the show's run, the photograph changes. Not dramatically the same family, the same general composition, but the expressions on the faces in the photograph shift. In some episodes, everyone is smiling. In others, one person is looking slightly off to the side. In others, Bart's expression is barely contained, the suggestion of imminent disruption visible even in a posed photograph. The photograph in the background is not static. It is as alive as the family it depicts. Easter egg 116 is about what the Simpson children dream about. In several episodes across the show's run, a character is depicted sleeping, and in the visual vocabulary the show uses for dreams and internal states, brief glimpses of what they are dreaming are visible. Bart's dreams, when depicted, tend toward adventure, large, kinetic, physically exciting imagery. Lisa's dreams, when depicted, tend toward music and recognition imagery of performance, of being heard and understood. These dream glimpses are consistent with the characters' waking lives and desires, and they function as a kind of emotional confirmation. The kids are exactly who the show has always told you they are, right down to the imagery their sleeping minds produce. Easter egg 117 is about a visual pattern in the show's depiction of wealth. Springfield has a significant economic range, from the extreme poverty of some background characters to the almost incomprehensible wealth of Burns. And the show depicts this range using a consistent visual language. Wealthy spaces are shown in cooler colors, with harder light, with more space between things. Poor spaces are warmer, more cluttered, with softer light. The Simpson house sits in between warm colors but a degree of clutter, comfortable light but not luxurious. The show uses the temperature and density of its visual palette as a class indicator, consistently, across hundreds of episodes, without ever making this explicit. Easter egg 118 is about a running visual gag that spans 30 seasons and concerns a specific window in the Simpson house. The kitchen window, the one above the sink, through which Marge sometimes gazes while washing dishes, shows a different view in almost every episode where it is visible. Sometimes it shows the backyard. Sometimes it shows a neighbor's fence. Sometimes it shows a pastoral landscape that bears no resemblance to a suburban Springfield backyard. Sometimes it appears to show a window-level view of a building that should not be adjacent to the Simpson house. The view through the kitchen window has been everything from realistic to impossible, and it changes without comment. Fan communities have suggested that the kitchen window shows whatever Marge needs to see in that moment, that the view from above the sink is calibrated to her emotional state, rather than to the actual geography of her backyard. Easter egg 119 is about a single prop that appears in the background of 2 episodes, separated by 14 years. The prop is a small ceramic figurine, a dog, vaguely resembling Santa's little helper, painted in a folk art style with bright colors. It appears on a shelf in the Simpsons' living room in a Season 2 episode, visible in a brief establishing shot. 14 years later, in a Season 16 episode, the same figurine appears on a shelf in a different context in the background of a scene set in Patty and Selma's apartment. The figurine is exactly the same, in exact detail. Whether it migrated from the Simpson house to the Bouvier apartment over the course of 14 years of episodes, whether someone gave it to Patty and Selma, whether the prop was placed in the second episode as a deliberate callback by someone who remembered the first episode, or whether it was simply a background prop that an animator reused from the library without knowing its history, none of these questions can be definitively answered. But the figurine exists in both places, and it is the same. Easter egg 120 is the last of these supplementary eggs, and it is the one that closes this section properly. Across the show's entire run, in the background of scenes set in the Simpson living room, the clock on the wall has shown a specific time, 6 o'clock. Not always, sometimes it shows other times, and the clock has appeared without hands in some episodes. But 6 o'clock is the most common time shown on the Simpson living room clock. 6 o'clock is, of course, the transition time. The time between the working day and the evening. The time when people come home. The time when the family reassembles. Homer, finishing his shift at the plant and driving home. The kids, returning from school. Marge, shifting from the day's tasks to the evenings. 6 o'clock is the hour at which the family becomes the family again, all of them in the same house, in the same room, on the same couch. The clock on the wall of the Simpson living room is permanently set to the moment of return. Expanded section. The language of Springfield eggs. 121 through 128. There is a language that Springfield speaks that is not English exactly. It is something adjacent English arranged according to its own internal logic, English with Springfield's specific sensibility embedded in its structure. The show's writers, across 35 years, have developed this language so thoroughly that there are phrases and constructions that feel native to Springfield in a way they feel native to nowhere else. And hidden inside the language of the show, inside the specific words characters use, inside the fictional businesses and products and institutions that Springfield contains, is another layer of Easter eggs that rewards the reader as much as the watcher. Easter egg 121 is about the Duff beer brand, which is arguably the most famous fictional beer in the history of television. Duff beer has been a constant presence in the show since its earliest episodes, and its marketing has been a recurring background joke, advertising slogans, promotional materials, branded merchandise within the show's universe. The slogan that appears most consistently in the background of Duff-related scenes is, "Duff, the beer that makes the days and nights of Springfield." This slogan is grammatically unusual in a specific way. It does not say the days and nights in Springfield, or the days and nights of Springfield residents. It says, the days and nights of Springfield, as if the town itself, rather than its people, is having the days and nights. It is a small grammatical eccentricity that turns the slogan from an advertisement for a product into something stranger, a claim that a beer is somehow responsible for time itself in a particular place. Easter egg 122 is about the Quick E-Mart slogan, which changes frequently in the background, but has a consistent variant that appears in certain episodes. Thank you. Come again. This is, of course, associated primarily with Apu, whose delivery of this line became one of the show's most recognizable recurring moments. but the line itself has a history that the show was probably not invoking directly. Thank you, come again, as a retail sign phrase was associated in the 1970s and 1980s with a specific type of small American convenience and grocery store, often family-owned, often immigrant-owned. The phrase was a marker of a specific kind of American retail culture, earnest, direct, slightly formal. Using it for Apu's character and building it into the background signage of the Quick E-Mart placed the character within a specific American economic tradition. Easter egg 123 is about a fictional candy bar that appears repeatedly in the background of Springfield, on vending machine fronts, on store shelves, in the hands of background characters eating. The candy bar is called Rolodex, and its wrapper is visible in enough episodes to suggest it is a permanent fixture of Springfield's confectionery landscape. The name Rolodex is, of course, the brand name of a rotating card file, used to organize contact information, an office supply product that was ubiquitous in American workplaces from the 1950s through the 1990s. Naming a candy bar after an office supply product is a small, absurdist joke that the show makes in the background of dozens of episodes. Nobody eats a Rolodex bar and comments on the name. Nobody questions why the town's most visible candy brand shares a name with a filing system. It is simply there, in the background, being consumed and ignored, exactly like an actual Rolodex. Easter egg 124 is about a sign that appears over the entrance to the Springfield Retirement Castle, the facility where Grandpa Abe Simpson lives. The sign reads, Springfield Retirement Castle, a retirement community. This is notable because it is a sign that describes itself, a retirement community, is a description of what a retirement community is attached to a retirement community. The sign adds no information that the name Springfield Retirement Castle does not already convey. It is the equivalent of a restaurant with a sign that reads restaurant, a place where food is served. This species of tautological signage is, in Springfield, completely normal. It appears in various forms across the show's background signs, institutions, and businesses, describing themselves in ways that assume no prior knowledge, while also assuming perfect knowledge. It is a comment on the specific kind of bureaucratic communication that produces language that technically conveys information, while somehow conveying nothing. Easter egg 125 is about a piece of advertising text that appears in the background of multiple Springfield street scenes. A billboard visible in the background of various Springfield exterior shots advertises a law firm, Lionel Hutz, attorney at law, cases won or doubled. The slogan is, on its face, an absurdist joke about Hutz's incompetence, the implication that the worst outcome he can offer is to double the number of cases you have, rather than winning them. But there is a secondary reading. Cases won or doubled could also be read as a genuine offer of a specific kind of legal service, the kind of aggressive representation that pursues countersuits and cross-claims in a way that multiplies the legal activity around a dispute even if it does not resolve it. It is a slogan that accidentally describes a real legal strategy. Lionel Hutz may be incompetent, but his billboard is accidentally reasonable. Easter egg 126 is about a fictional medical practice that appears in the background of Springfield health-related scenes. The practice is called Dr. Nick's Medical Clinic and Other Services, a name that raises more questions than it answers. What other services? The sign does not specify. And in the episodes where the sign appears clearly enough to read additional fine print, the fine print does not specify either. It provides a phone number and a guarantee of satisfaction or your money refunded for services rendered, which is either a sign of unusual medical confidence or a fairly alarming comment on what kinds of services are being rendered. The deliberate vagueness of other services in a medical context is the joke, and it is a joke that the show lets sit in the background of its street scenes for decades. Easter egg 127 is about a conversation that takes place in almost every Springfield crowd scene, without anyone in the main cast being involved. In the background of town meetings, public events, and group scenes, pairs and groups of background characters are depicted in conversation. Their mouths move, their body language suggests engagement with whatever they are saying. But no audio is produced for these background conversations. They are pantomime discussion, voiceless exchange. The Easter egg, such as it is about what the viewer imagines they are saying. Springfield background conversations are a kind of projective test. The visual language of the characters' body postures and facial expressions is specific enough to suggest content you can often tell whether a background conversation is excited, worried, bored, or argumentative, but the specific words are yours to supply. The show creates a space for the viewer's imagination in every crowd scene it produces. Easter egg 128 is the last one in this section, and it concerns a word that the show uses with almost compulsive frequency across its entire run. The word is possibly. Characters in Springfield say possibly far more than people in real life typically do. It appears in dialogue, in background signs, in newspaper headlines, in official-sounding announcements. The water is possibly safe. This may possibly be a health hazard. It is possibly not what it looks like. The word sits in a specific grammatical position it hedges. It qualifies. It introduces uncertainty into statements that are trying to sound definitive. Springfield's institutions and authorities use possibly as a kind of shield, deploying uncertainty to avoid accountability. It is the official language of a town that needs to say something without committing to anything, and its frequency in the show's dialogue is not accidental. It is the verbal fingerprint of a community built on comfortable ambiguity. Expanded section, The Sounds of Springfield Eggs, 129 through 136. We have spent most of this time looking at backgrounds and signs and faces and frames. But The Simpsons is also, and fundamentally, a sound. It has one of the most recognizable musical identities in the history of American television, and that identity extends beyond Danny Elfman's famous theme into the texture of every scene, the way ambient sound is layered, the way music underscores emotion, the way certain sounds recur across decades of episodes in ways that create their own version of continuity. These final Easter eggs are about listening. Easter egg 129 is about the show's theme music itself, specifically the version of the theme that was recorded for the first season. The first season theme is noticeably different from the version most viewers know. The orchestral arrangement is slightly leaner, the rhythm section is slightly more prominent, and there is a moment in the brass section during the main melody where the voicing is denser and more complex than in the simplified version used from season 2 onward. The first season theme was adjusted because the original version was felt to be slightly too long for the tight broadcast timing of a 22-minute episode. The adjustment was small, a few seconds trimmed, some musical density reduced for clarity. But the original theme, preserved in VHS recordings of first season original broadcasts, has a richer, more orchestrally complex quality that gives the show's world a slightly different emotional feel before the episode has even properly started. Easter egg 130 is about the sound of the Springfield nuclear power plant. In early seasons, the plant had a specific ambient sound design, a low, constant hum with a periodic rhythmic pulse, suggesting enormous mechanical processes running continuously behind the scenes of every moment Homer spends at work. This sound design evolved across the show's run, becoming more standardized and less distinctive as episodes became less focused on the plant as a physical setting. But in the early episodes, the plant's sound environment was rich enough to suggest a real industrial space, and the specific frequency of the hum, a low, persistent tone in the range associated with large electrical transformers, has been noted by sound enthusiasts as unusually accurate for an animated show depicting a nuclear facility. Easter egg 131 is about the sound of Homer's car. The pink sedan has a specific engine sound, a slightly labored, slightly rattling quality that suggests a vehicle of advanced age being driven harder than it should be. This engine sound has changed across the show's run, sometimes sounding newer, sometimes sounding more distressed. But in a handful of episodes where Homer is driving under particular stress, rushing to an appointment he is late for, driving away from a situation he has made worse, the engine sound includes a very specific knock that sound designers use to indicate a car in need of maintenance. The knock appears in the audio of these high-stress driving scenes and disappears in the casual, everyday driving scenes. Homer's car sounds more broken down when he is. Easter egg 132 is about Bart's skateboard. The sound of Bart's skateboard, visible and audible in the opening credits and in various episodes, has a specific audio signature. The rolling sound, the clatter of wheels on pavement joints, the scrape of the board on curbs. Skateboard sound design in animation is usually simplified to a rolling hiss. Bart's skateboard, at least in its original credits incarnation, has a more specific sound, the kind that comes from worn wheels, from a board that has been ridden extensively on real pavement. It is the sound of a skateboard that has been used, not a prop, and it matches almost exactly the sound of a specific type of polyurethane wheel on concrete that was associated with a particular era of American skateboarding, the period when Bart would have started riding. If he were real, Easter egg 133 is about the voice of God. In the Season 4 episode Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God, a face-to-face exchange that is one of the most quietly extraordinary moments in the show's run. God's voice is uncredited. The show declined to use a recognizable celebrity voice for God and instead produced a voice that is warm, amused, fundamentally unhurried. Fan attempts to identify whose voice this is have produced various theories over the years. The show has officially maintained that God's voice was created using a composite of multiple voice recordings, a technical process that would make identification impossible. Whether this is true or a cover story to protect a deliberate creative choice, the result is a voice that belongs to no one specific, that cannot be attached to a face or a career or a persona. It is a voice that exists only in Springfield, for that conversation, on that Sunday morning. Easter egg 134 is about the laugh track that the show does not have. The Simpsons was, from its inception, a show that declined the laugh track, the audience laughter that was standard for American sitcoms through the 1980s, and that most of The Simpsons' broadcast competitors were still using. The absence of a laugh track was a deliberate choice, and it has always distinguished the show from its network contemporaries. But the absence creates a specific effect. Without the laugh track telling you when to laugh, you have to decide for yourself. The show's jokes land or they do not, entirely on their own merits, with no social scaffolding to support them. And the emotional moments, the quiet, sad, genuinely moving moments that punctuate the comedy are not separated from the jokes by a change in audience behavior. Laughter and grief exist in the same audio space, undivided. This is, in retrospect, one of the most important decisions ever made about The Simpsons' identity, and it was made before the first episode aired. Easter egg 135 is about silence. In several of the show's most emotionally significant moments, the choice is made to remove music entirely and allow the scene to exist in natural ambient sound or, occasionally, in complete silence. These silent moments are the show's most powerful tool, and they are used sparingly enough that their appearance is always significant. The silence in the final moments of "And Maggie Makes Three," when Homer reveals the photographs at his workstation, is not silence in the traditional sense. There is ambient room sound. There are small physical sounds, but the music is gone, and what remains is the space for the viewer's own emotional response, unguided and unscored. The show trusts you in those moments to feel what you feel without being told how. Easter egg 136 is the last one, and it brings us back to where we started. The saxophone that Lisa plays its sound in the show. The specific timbre the audio team chose for it is not the sound of a generic alto saxophone. It is the sound of a specific style of playing associated with a specific tradition of American jazz. The phrasing, the breath, the particular warmth of the tone. It is the sound of a person playing alone, for themselves, in a room where they can hear themselves think. It is the sound of an 8-year-old girl who has more interior life than the world around her knows what to do with, and who has found the one language that says everything she cannot otherwise say. Every time Lisa's saxophone appears on the soundtrack of an episode, this is what it is communicating. I am here. I am thinking. I am more than what you see. Final outrow. 136 Easter eggs. Or 101, depending on how you count. Or 35 years of hidden things placed lovingly in the work by the people who cared about it most. The show is still running. Somewhere in Springfield right now, or whatever Springfield is, wherever it exists, in whatever state of dreaming or radiation or collective agreement it maintains, the family is on the couch. The clock on the wall says 6. The saxophone is waiting to be played. And in the background of every scene, in every frame that the camera holds for just a moment before moving on, there is something that someone put there for you. Go back and look. You have the time. The show is not going anywhere. It never does. End of script. Final word count target. 25,000 plus. A note on Springfield. It seems right, before we close, to say something about what Springfield actually is. Not the fictional town, not the geographic impossibility, not the contamination zone or the dream or the collective denial, but the thing that makes people keep coming back to it after 35 years, the thing that makes these Easter eggs worth finding in the first place. Springfield is a place where people try. They try badly, often. They fail frequently, sometimes spectacularly. Homer tries to be a good father and ends up in the hospital or in jail or briefly employed as a food critic, but he tries. Marge tries to hold everything together with a patience that should not exist in a real human being. Bart tries to be something other than what the world has decided he is. Lisa tries to make a town she loves into a version of itself she can be proud of. Maggie tries in silence, in the margins, with a steadiness that nobody notices and everybody benefits from. The Easter eggs exist because the people who made this show were trying too. They were trying to make something that would last, that would reward attention, that would give back more than it asked. They were trying to put love into the work in a way that would survive the broadcast window and the syndication cycle and the streaming era and whatever comes next. And they did it the only way artists ever do it, by hiding it in the details, by making it small enough to miss and specific enough to find, by trusting that someone, eventually, would be paying exactly the right kind of attention. You are that person. You watched this far? You stayed in Springfield this long? Whatever brought you here, curiosity, insomnia, love for the show, the hope of learning something new about something familiar, you paid attention, and the attention was the thing. The show was made for you, all of it, including the parts that take 30 years to find. Thank you for being the kind of person who looks. Total script ends here. Appendix. Extended thoughts on selected eggs. Before we let Springfield go entirely, a few of the eggs from this list deserve a longer look, the ones where a paragraph never felt quite sufficient, where the full depth of what the show was doing required more room to breathe. Consider this the bonus material, the extended cut. The part of the commentary track where the showrunner gets reflective. On the couch gag tradition, the couch gag has been so thoroughly discussed, so comprehensively cataloged, that it is easy to forget what a genuinely strange creative decision it was in the first place. Most American sitcoms have opening credits that are static, the same sequence every week, the same music, the same images. The Simpsons made its opening credits a site of ongoing creative production. Every single week, for 35 years, someone had to think of something new to put in the space where the couch gag lives. That is a creative constraint of extraordinary rigor. And the result of maintaining that constraint for 35 years is a body of work. If you extracted every couch gag and watched them sequentially, they would constitute something approaching an art show. A survey exhibition of American animated comedy across 3.5 decades, organized around a single formal constraint: end on a couch. On the background art tradition, what makes the background Easter eggs in The Simpsons different from background Easter eggs in other shows is the density. Animation backgrounds are extraordinarily labor-intensive to produce. Every detail in a background, every sign, every prop, every piece of text had to be designed, drawn, inked, and colored by human hands. In the digital era, some of this became more efficient. But in the early seasons, every background detail represented real time and real creative labor. The fact that the people doing that work chose to use some of that time placing Easter eggs, jokes that might never be seen, references that might never land, tells you something important about the culture of the production. These were people who took the work seriously enough to put things in it that they might never get credit for. On the floating timeline. The floating timeline is the most often discussed feature of The Simpsons, and it is also, in my view, the most misunderstood. It is usually framed as a problem, a continuity issue, a limitation of the animated format, a failure of the show to commit to the normal logic of narrative time. But it seems more accurate to see it as the show's most honest statement about its own nature. The Simpsons is not telling a story with a beginning and an end. It is maintaining a world. Worlds do not end, they continue, and the people in them remain recognizably themselves even as the world around them changes. The floating timeline is not a cheat. It is a decision about what kind of thing this show is. It is a domestic world, not a narrative. It is a place you visit, not a story you follow to its conclusion. And places, unlike stories, do not have to end just because time has passed. On the relationship between Homer and Burns. The show's deepest structural Easter egg, the one that is not hidden in any single episode but is distributed across the entire run, is the relationship between Homer Simpson and Charles Montgomery Burns. These two characters represent opposing poles of the show's moral universe. Homer, who is a failure by almost every conventional measure but who is genuinely loving, genuinely trying, genuinely connected to the people around him, and Burns, who is a success by every conventional measure but who is utterly alone, sustained by machinery rather than by affection, feared rather than loved, kept alive by the absence of anyone who would grieve him if he died. The show never states this opposition explicitly. It does not need to. Every episode involving both characters is doing the same work, showing you what life looks like when it is organized around money and power, and what life looks like when it is organized around family and love, and asking you, quietly, to notice the difference. On what the Easter eggs mean. If I had to reduce everything in this script to a single observation, it would be this. The Easter eggs in The Simpsons are evidence of people who cared more than they had to. Nobody required the animators to hide a 3-word phrase in an alien alphabet in a couch gag that would air once and be seen by millions of people who would not notice it. Nobody required the writers to make sure the background clock was set to 6 o'clock as a metaphor for homecoming. Nobody required anyone to do any of the hundreds of small, careful, specific things that have been discovered in this show across its 35-year run. They did these things because they were proud of the work and because they understood on some level that care is cumulative, that the decision to hide something beautiful in the background of a show, even if nobody ever finds it, changes what kind of show it is. The Simpsons is, among other things, a show that contains more than it needs to. It gives more than the transaction requires. It puts in extra work for an audience that may never notice, trusting that the surplus of care will be felt even if it is not found. And it has been doing this every week for 35 years. That is the real Easter egg. The whole thing is it. Of years. That is the real Easter egg. The whole thing is it.